On the streets of the bustling city, people were eagerly discussing the upcoming birthday of Mr. Alt the Royal Tamer, who was turning 18. For their state, this was truly an important event. They were pondering what exact ability he would receive upon reaching adulthood. But almost everyone was convinced it would definitely be some good ability, it couldn't be otherwise. A comfortable life with the gods begins with good skills. Everyone was certain, as long as their master Alt is here, this kingdom will be completely and safely protected. Yet something was clearly going wrong. Despite the joyful noise of the inhabitants, Alt learned that from today he was being expelled from the city, and he was completely confused and shocked. He was expelled not only from the kingdom, but also from the city, even from his own home, the one where he had grown up until this very moment. In this world, when a person reaches adulthood, they receive an extremely important opportunity, the same for everyone, to choose a unique ability for themselves. The boy who got involved in such a difficult story is named Alt. He works in the kingdom's palace as a monster hunter. He easily finds common ground with these creatures and even talks to them, tailoring care and a special approach to each. Today he turned 18. He chose an ability that enraged his father. He loudly asked whether this ability really required 1,000,000 gold just to summon a monster. And in the end, it remained unknown which monster would appear. Altostin stretched his hands forward, trying to defend himself, and told his father that he was the god Gacha. Alt's father did not believe him at all. Then the son extended a magical book that evaluates magical abilities so that he could look at the status and be convinced that his words were true. Yes, the book stated that this young man was the god Gacha. He could summon a random messenger with a divine attribute to Gacha in exchange for gold. And the general skill was monster taming, which enhances abilities. The man did not believe at all and angrily scolded the boy for wanting to destroy his Austin family. Pointing his finger right at him, he fiercely clenched his son's fist. Sitting in his place, the father sighed heavily. He remembered that he had a bad feeling, and in the son's head there were only these monsters. He did not think about the country at all. The young man wanted to justify himself and stated that these monsters of the royal court protect the entire city, because it is truly an honorable job, and even together with Austin House himself. But the father did not listen to him. For such money, one could build an entire estate. Then the father asked the son to prove the usefulness of this skill. He ordered to confirm that the skill god summoner is really useful. The man ordered to gather all the wealth and bring it to Alt, but Alt began to worry that he would not live up to his father's expectations. And then the father said that he would simply have to drive the ungrateful son out of their home. This frightened the boy, but he was even more worried about what would happen to the monsters he had been caring for all this time. He knows the traits of all the monsters in the royal palace, and if they stop listening to him, he will simply lose his father's trust. But the man calmed his son, because Alt's twin brother Namakil managed to acquire the ability Dragon Tamer, and therefore with such a skill all the lower monsters will definitely be under his control. He assured them that they would have an advantage over neighboring states, and that with Namakil his county would definitely be safe. A chest full of gold was thrown in front of the boy, and his father said that it contained exactly 1,000,000 gold coins. Everything spilled onto the floor, and Alt was surprised. If the brother really is a dragon tamer and the boy is right, then as soon as he leaves, everyone will be in mortal danger. But it seems the father did not think so. The boy looked at his hand and clenched it into a fist. He told himself that this was not the end yet. He would summon a monster that could rival even a dragon, and then he would be able to protect everyone in this kingdom because it is his duty. He used his talent, believing that they would all live in peace. Suddenly, in the middle of the room, a round platform appeared, and magical symbols immediately flared up on it. Everyone in the room froze in surprise, and because of this, Alt stood up. In surprise, he looked at the disc hanging above the ground right in front of him. Suddenly, a huge table appeared, and the young man began to carefully examine it. He decided that the huge table before him was just an instruction. Alta's attention was drawn to a note. Only the first time was he guaranteed to receive a goddess with an SSR rating, but he did not understand at all what that meant. Alt began to carefully examine the screen with images of various monsters and looked at them with admiration. A hope flashed in his mind that he could summon one of these most powerful monsters. But if all this was really true and he could summon at least one of them, then there was still hope. Looking at the gold, he began to appeal to the god Gacha to summon the god. And then a pillar of light appeared above the huge disc, and gusts of wind burst around it. All those present were completely confused and just silently watched as what was happening happened. The glow flared even brighter and blinded everyone for a few moments. Then it completely disappeared, leaving only smoke covering something like a wall. The father could not take his eyes off it. He was even surprised that his son was able to call someone. A few moments later, on this platform among the smoke, a female shoulder and some voices became visible quiet indignation over an unsuccessful landing. Alt froze in horror. He realized that everything had gone not as he expected. When the smoke completely cleared, a girl was visible who had no idea how she ended up here. But her gaze immediately stopped on Alti. This was Rudia, the goddess of fertility, with an SSR rank. The man was clearly frightened. He had summoned an ordinary man, not the monster from the list he had seen earlier. The girl's sudden jump scared the young man even more. She jumped onto Alt and, shouting that she missed him terribly, caught his gaze. He himself didn't understand anything at all and was only becoming more and more confused. Smiling sincerely, the girl decided to introduce herself and exclaimed that she was Rudia, the goddess of fertility. Then she hugged the boy again and joyfully exclaimed that she had been waiting for him to call her, then asked if he was okay in this world. But Alta still had no idea where this girl knew him from or who she was to him. The stern father interrupted them. The father asked angrily what other divine monster had appeared. But before Alt could say a single word, the man had already started talking wildly to him and even jumped to his feet. He informed that from this moment the young man must leave not only this house, but also the city itself. And repeating again, he voiced for the second time his decision to expel this boy from the house and from the city. The father gave Alt the borderlands of Silesia and ordered him not to return until he proved he had justified his name. Then, turning away, he said goodbye to his son who no longer had a home. This is how Alt ended up exiled from this place and from his family. The boy and Rudio stood on the roof. The boy was completely detached from the world. He looked down and thought. He was so immersed in his thoughts that he did not even hear his name being called. When the young man finally turned around and paid attention to her, the goddess asked offendedly if he was listening to her at all. Apparently, her mood was upset by his gloomy attitude. That Tommy Midivnik asked what happened to the girl he so stubbornly calls his. But she noticed that he was not listening to her at all and added, he thoughtlessly calls others' skills worthless, although they are actually very good. The man noted that nothing is perfect, yet at the same time they were talking about his father. The goddess averted her gaze from shame and remarked that her interlocutor was too kind even to those who did not deserve it at all. But Alt still asked the girl who she was, because she stood here before him with a look as if everything around belonged to him and whether she was, by any chance, not a monster. Rudia was terribly offended by such words. She began reproaching that boy for how he dared to say such monstrous things to such a beautiful, sweet girl like her. The girl was even about to get up closer to him, but he recoiled and asked her not to do that. Rudia reminded that she is a goddess, whom the god named God Gachai called by the boy's skill. The girl also added, unfortunately they still have not met in this world. Smiling, she said that from now on she would serve him both as a messenger forever and ever. The young man sighed heavily, and the goddess did not back down. She had already realized that the interlocutor had lost all memories of his former life. Yet she still impatiently awaited a new meeting with him and had even come dressed like this on purpose. She exclaimed with inspiration that this was why she was paid for this summoning, and that he not only got to use Hera, such lovely goddess, but also inherited part of her abilities. Then she asked that boy to check her status, and Al, having looked at what was written in the magic book, pulled her out in surprise. Under his unique skill was an engraved instruction about a new additional skill drops of the world tree. It was given to him by the goddess of fertility and allows releasing drops that fully restore HP and MP. They say that after you turn 18, you can only get one unique skill per person, and it was believed that was all. But before that, they added a new skill. This skill allows you to fully restore HP and MP, heal any wounds, and even resurrect, but only within 24 hours after their death. But the frozen thought made him raise his hand to his face. Everything seemed simply incredible and fascinating to him. Rudia approached the boy and looked at him slyly, asking if the young man was still silent after seeing the skills he got from her. She said that 2,000 years ago the elves paid her a huge tribute to obtain a miraculous ability, a drop of the world tree. And 2,000 years ago a terrible war occurred between the 7 great demon kings, and it did not pass without a trace. All the gods lost their power and fell into a deep sleep. Yet Rudia revealed that he has a trump card that can restore all the gods. And this very ability was entrusted to both God of Gachai. Hearing this, the boy was extremely surprised. He did not understand how his ability could be so important. The young man looked away and admitted, the scale of this is too great, and he himself was no longer a nobleman. He could not even return to his city, so he did not understand what someone like him could do. Smiling, he remembered that his brother managed to acquire strong skills, so Alt could simply go to Silesia and live there peacefully, without returning home. The young man wearily stretched, loosening his back, and confessed, He had worked all his life, so this was even a good chance now he had freedom. Now he could finally do whatever he wanted, but the conversation was interrupted. Alt froze, staring somewhere down. Something on the street caught his attention. It was a giant wolf attacking the people of this city. Everyone around was tearing away in panic, but there was no rescue, only helpless screams, begging someone to call adventurers to get rid of this trouble. Rudia, noticing this, screamed in horror and fear, and the monster growled, looking around as if choosing a victim to attack. And the next moment, the monster lunged straight at the crowd. People immediately scattered in panic in all directions. Alt noticed this right away and watched every movement closely. And indeed, while people were panicking and scattering, some were covering each other, and the children, this monster was raging and wildly attacking, scratching with its claws. The man was terribly frightened and completely disheveled by such a sight. The goddess immediately noticed how the young man's hands began to tremble. The girl, confused, turned to her interlocutor and asked what was wrong with him, how he felt, and if everything was all right. But he did not answer and clenched his teeth fiercely as if he was about to do something at any moment. He apologized to Rudia, jumped over the railing and rushed to the creature. Jumping down and rushing up the stairs, he leapt at the monster. It was already on the verge of attacking one of the inhabitants. Alt jumped onto the wolf's back and, holding on tightly, fiercely commanded it to stop. The people standing nearby were terrified to death and extremely surprised by this boy's action. The young man stepped forward and grabbed the creature by the snout, squeezing the monster's jaws so it would no longer scare other people, then gave the order again. Quiet, obedient, sit down. The monster convulsively tried to unclench its jaw. It growled, tore across, fought wildly, and then finally pressed its head to the ground. He shouted loudly, looking the monster straight in the eyes. Everything is fine, they are on the same side, so no one will harm this creature. But this did not convince the dog. He continued to struggle aggressively and growl, showing hostility. But Alt still did not give up. He continued to squeeze the dog's head and pressed, convincing it that he would protect it, until the dog slowly relaxed and completely lay down on the ground. The monster was still growling, but much more calmly, and Alt still did not let it go. The boy, noticing that the creature began to quiet down, smiled, and the people nearby just froze in amazement, watching from the side. The man freed one hand, plunged into the bag and took out a strange bundle, beginning to untie it with his teeth. It was a huge piece of meat. The boy brought it right to the animal's mouth and explained that it was probably hungry, so it could eat and calm down. Then Alt asked the white wolf to finally come to its senses and not do stupid things. The hunter beast greedily lunged at the piece of meat, and the young man noted that the problem was precisely the hunger of that animal. Alt continued to watch the white wolf, but suddenly Ruddy quickly ran up to him and shouted that there was a wounded man there. A crowd of people gathered around something on the street. In the center of the crowd lay a girl. The people around tried to stop the bleeding, but it helped little. She had hit her head too hard and was still unconscious, so even restorative magic could no longer do anything. Near the girl sat her child and sobbed, begging his mother to wake up, while the woman lay still, continuing to bleed. Alt approached and froze in horror when he saw the condition of the wounded woman. Those who rushed to help the girl quickly recognized Master Al, the royal animal trainer. The young man ordered everyone to calm down, but the people did not quiet down. They continued to talk about the wolf monster that had broken free in the wild. The boy immediately realized the girl was seriously wounded and unconscious. Alt wondered if he would even be allowed into the palace, but it was worth trying. Meanwhile, the child kept bursting into tears. The man jumped up and shouted that he would call the court mage. And if the travelers could not use their magic, then they should use their skills, prepare bandages and water. One man insisted that his shop was around the corner so he could handle Veda, while another shouted that he had a first aid kit at home. When Alt ran towards the palace, Rudia grabbed his hand and stopped him. The girl stubbornly asked Alt to wait. And then she added that he had no reason to run to the palace, because he could do everything himself. Not understanding what the goddess was saying, the man turned to her in surprise without uttering a word. He shifted his gaze to the people waiting for his answer, and then the boy, the daughter's son, said what everyone was thinking. The child reported that he had heard, "Today is the birthday of the son from the Austin family." Rudia clenched her fists and looked resolutely at the young man, encouraging him to trust his own abilities, and he decided to do just that. Taking a step towards the wounded woman, he raised his hand to his chest and asked the people to allow him to do so. Alt leaned over the sick woman and stretched out his hands, while everyone else froze, not taking their eyes off. The young man seemed to be addressing someone and hoped that his skills would be useful. He called a drop from the tree of the world, and under his outstretched hands, drops formed one by one. Small drops fell on the face of the wounded woman and slowly trickled down her cheeks. After a few moments, a soft, pleasant glow appeared in the air and spread throughout the area. The child, who had been crying until then, froze in amazement, not taking his eyes off everything that was happening. Bright light gently spread over the girl's entire body. Even Alt himself was surprised when he saw the warm light he had created with his own hands. The blood slowly disappeared, and the girl's wounds simply closed and tightened. This surprised everyone who was nearby. Even Alt himself looked surprised, as if he did not expect this. The woman slowly opened her eyes and got up as if nothing had happened. She herself did not even understand what was happening while the people around were shouting with joy. The child rushed into the mother's arms and everyone around was sure this was a miracle. Alt froze in place, realizing that he had managed to do what he intended. Rudio approached the man who was sitting near what had happened and was happily looking at his hands. He was clearly very pleased. The girl sighed with relief when she saw that everything was fine. People began to discuss that this was made possible thanks to the skill of Master Alt. He definitely had skillful hands, and he also knew how to tame a dangerous white wolf. For this they were grateful. The monster lowered its ears and tail, looked at Elect pityingly as if it finally realized its mistake and was asking for forgiveness. The boy assured him that everything was already fine and there was no reason to worry or be angry. The boys got out beyond the gates, and Alt noted that he was very satisfied with such a successful day. But Rudio was worried about the boy and asked if he really wanted to leave this city. In response, the boy said that in any case he had already been expelled from there, so there was nothing to be done. Suddenly the white wolf cuddled up pitifully and all eyes immediately turned to him. Alt turned to the wolf and said he would name him Snowball because he was all white. The goddess, examining the monster's fur, noted it was incredibly cute and fluffy. But just now her emotions immediately changed to irritation. The girl did not understand how someone formerly accustomed to taming could simply abandon this white wolf. What do they even think about monsters? She was incredibly upset. She sat next to the monster and said that she was very sorry, but the new owner of Snowball was a very kind person, and this was truly the truth. Hearing this, the dog growled loudly in response. Then the goddess noticed their favorite was already happy. She recalled what had happened recently and noted that his proper apologies to the child and mother were simply wonderful. Alt noted that the problem is that this wolf is hungry. Rudia added that this dog really looks too thin, as if it had been fed properly. The young man said that now everything would be fine with the wolf because he does not want this to happen to everyone, not just to Snowball, so he is ready to give his all. The goddess asked in amazement what Alt means in these words. Then he told her that maybe it was okay to have monsters on their side, but when they met them face to face, he was sure they would manage. What happened today reminded Altsu of a very important dream. He remembered that he wanted to create a paradise where all monsters could live freely, and a paradise where they would be happy living together with people. The young man really wanted everyone to get along with each other. That was indeed his dream. Rudio was surprised to hear this. After these words, the dog happily licked his new owner, and Alt himself noted that all this happened only thanks to Ruddy. The girl tilted her head in surprise and asked why the boy said that. The man explained that then she said, he can handle everything on his own and will definitely manage. In the end, he was able to save the mother of that child. And in the end, even Snowball was forgiven for his fault. That's how Alt fulfilled his dream. He admitted that all this was entirely thanks to the council and the skills it passed on to that boy, and then sincerely thanked it. The girl was embarrassed by such words and even blushed. She did not even know how to respond to Alt's gratitude and nervously tried to find the right words. And suddenly she asked to hug that guy just like that and even clarified what he was talking about. He was so sweet and it seemed completely natural, so she had to help him. Now Alt couldn't find a place for himself. The girl jumped into the boy's arms and stubbornly kept asking what else he wanted from her. He awkwardly began to explain that everything was fine, that he just wanted to thank the goddess for everything she had done for him, and then in despair asked Snowball for help. A little later, when the boys finally calmed down, they were ready to set out to explore Silesia and build a city there, as well as face new, unimaginable difficulties. The young man asked if Ruddy would go with them. Clenching her fists, the girl replied that she would definitely go with them and there was no need to say it. She and Alt were engaged, so she would do everything possible to help him wherever he went. The chilled, kinder brother from the Austin family thanked the goddess and they moved on, although he still noted that he did not understand at all what the girl meant by the words about the engagement, since he had not yet made any promises to anyone. Rudia only impatiently asked the boy to remember one important thing. And these three finally set off for Silesia, looking forward to an exciting journey. After some time, the sun had already set and was replaced by the moon, brightly illuminating the dark forest. The boys were tired on the road, so Alt suggested stopping and resting here. Toddy and everyone agreed. The boy thanked Snizhko for the help on the road after all. He carried the boys on his back almost the entire time. And Rudia, not missing the chance, pressed closely to Alta so that he would not fall on the way. The goddess noticed that she could hardly believe how much Alt loved the snowball and then added, "This guy really looks like a skilled trainer." Her companion replied that skilled was an understatement and that they had only met today. Rudia asked indignantly why he decided that they met only today, although they have been friends for 2,000 years. And in general, she knew more about Alta than he did. She was looking for something again. The young man immediately turned away to avoid seeing too much, asking again what she was doing. Then suddenly the goddess took out a small magic stone and said that it was a sacred stone. It was given as a bonus for entry. When Alt lifted the stone, he began to examine it and asked again what the introductory bonus was. Rudia folded her hands and dreamily replied that it was her love, frozen in a crystal, and if the young man collected 5 such stones, he would be able to launch God Gacha once. She said that this boy should be amazed by the beauty of her love, but the young man was thinking about something completely different, so he explained. If he had that, it would mean he wouldn't need millions of gold coins at all. Rudia replied, "It's true, but he can challenge at rank R and below for free." Alt said that even such a rank is already great, and the girl clarified, if they accumulate 1,000,000 gold, then the SSR rank will become available to them. After thinking, Alt considered it and refused to take the stone, deciding instead to use it to pay for that time. But this did not suit the goddess at all. She admitted that she was so happy to see Alt today that she was able to create 3 stones instead of 1. The girl hysterically fell to the floor and nervously screamed that the guy should take even more from her, and he was convincing her that there was simply no need for that. A little later, when the girl had calmed down, Alt said he would go prepare for sleep. Rudia, having just stood on her hands, made a stern facial expression and turned to her companion with a question. Does he know who the Demon King is? Not hearing a response, she decided to tell him that he is the demon lord of this world, the ruler and leader of evil. And to resurrect the sealed gods even before the appearance of the demon lord, one must mock the gods. She sharply turned around and asked to be taken away to save this world. But no one was listening to the girl anymore. Her companion was quietly sleeping, lying on the tail of the white wolf. After 2 days, the Robotassi were still on the road to the lands of Silesia, traveling through the snow. They were already standing at the entrance to the destination, a village called Sea of Demons, and the pioneer village was supposed to be nearby, so Alt ordered everyone to be on alert. And it was not in vain, because he himself noticed something that greatly surprised him. The village ahead was half ruined, houses broken and battered, and only splinters remained of the gates. If you look closely, you can see, the battle is happening right now. Goblins are attacking this villagering to set houses on fire and take everything valuable they can. Meanwhile, the residents are fighting back at any cost. Rudy asked confusedly and anxiously what they should do, since goblins are demons, which means they cannot be tamed even with his skills. But the young man still understood. They had to somehow get rid of the attackers. He ordered Ruddy to hide in the thicket of trees and not come out until it was all over, even without listening to her words, that what he planned was very dangerous. Alt quickly noticed the goblin on the stairs and decided that he was their leader. He had a crown on his head, so he ordered Snowball to run straight at him. The youth cut the ladder and ordered the goblins to stop. The leader of the opponents said it was too dangerous and asked if a peasant really stood before him. But the goblin leader could not accept this and ordered everyone to attack this boy. He was hunting their leader. But Alt was not going to stop and swung to strike. Quickly settling the situation, the goblin leader took the little girl hostage and threatened that they could destroy the entire village. Alt was afraid to continue the attack and ordered the wolf to retreat. But it was all a calculated move. The bow was already aimed at the young man, who hesitated about what would be right. Only Rudy managed to notice and tried to warn him. But the guy did not have time to react. The weapon hit Al's arm and he could not stay on his feet and fell. Seeing this, the goblins immediately rushed into attack while their enemy lay on the ground. Snowball saw this too and, baring his fangs, rushed to help his master. He quickly ran around the young man, not letting anyone approach or even touch the conscript. Goblins continued to set everything around on fire, and had already reached the tower while people desperately tried to escape. Rudia watched everything anxiously from the side. Goblins were looting people's homes, taking all valuables they could see. They intended to capture the villagers after the thefts and planned to start with the youth. The girl could no longer silently watch everything that was happening, so she screamed loudly, trying to attract Alt's attention. But not only the young man noticed the goddess, the goblins saw her too, so they decided to grab her first. Filled with determination, she ignored her opponents and asked the boy to use Gacha's power. She loudly declared that Gacha is not just a billing skill, but a power that makes people and God happy. and is meant for the common good. The young man remembered his power and that Rudia had given him a bonus for entering. He threw 5 sacred stones, summoning his abilities and using his mastery. A magical circle appeared in the air, followed by a pillar of bright light, and Gachai's skill was successfully activated. Instead of a magical summoning circle, a huge dragon grew there in moments. A rare divine dragon of our rank Bahamut. He bent one leg, kicked with his paws, dust flared up in the air. The goblins and people froze in place, mouths agape in amazement. The creature bowed its head and said it had come here by divine summons, then immediately asked permission to destroy the enemies of its master, so let it be with all the power it has. The young man froze in surprise and looked directly at Bahamut. He recalled, the divine dragon was once recognized as the strongest being created by the creator god to confront the demon king. And while he was thinking, the dragon was already accumulating magical power in its jaws. The boy rushed to the dragon, begging it not to accumulate such power and to wait a little because there was a hostage. But it seemed that stopping this creature was already impossible. The dragon said that everyone could be sure. Its divine fire breath would destroy only those fools who stood against its master. The entire territory along with the miserable goblins would be wiped out. Hearing this, the monsters fell to their knees and begged the fierce creature for forgiveness. Bahamut yielded to no one who raised swords against its master. All would pay for this. When the dragon was already ready to attack, Alt ordered it to stop. Then it obediently vanished, leaving only emptiness in the air. The young man sighed with relief. Then it obediently vanished, leaving only emptiness in the air. The young man sighed with relief. In his hands appeared something small, and smoking a Bahamut card with information about it and its rank. Having read it carefully, the youth turned to the goblins who had attacked him earlier. They were kneeling and, having dropped their weapons, waited. As soon as they noticed the youth's gaze, they pushed the crown towards him and, bowing to fate, greeted him on his return. Some time passed, and the sounds of battle no longer reached the air, and this made Alta even happier. He looked carefully at the card he had recently received after the dragon left. Rudia explained that this was a card for summoning monsters, and this surprised Alta. He asked if he really needed to carry this card around. The goddess of fertility explained, yes, exactly that. The god Gachai does not stop acting after being summoned. The boy can summon the creature again and again, but there was one important but. The boy looked at the card and saw. Under the image it said that the call requires 100 MP and also 1 MP for each minute to maintain the conversation. He immediately realized. His maximum MP was 120, and that definitely would not be enough because the magic required too much. The girl placed her hand on the boy's shoulder and said it was very important to know exactly where to call, after which she added, "Restoration complete." The boy thanked her and noted that he had forgotten about his companion's ability to use drops of the world tree. When Rudia explained that this was her goddess power earlier, Alta asked if in that case she could also become a card. The goddess admitted that yes, true, but she wanted to remain in this form as long as possible and had the ability to act independently. And then, holding on to the boy, the girl added that she would be very sorry if he made a map out of her. Alta understood her words, her desire, and sincerely thanked her for the help. A little embarrassed, the girl asked if that was all, but she did not manage to hear the young man's answer. She was interrupted by a creature that appeared nearby. The monster asked what would happen to them next. No one even thought that Alta had such power. The young man admitted that he had no intention of destroying the goblins, but if they continued to attack his village, that would be a completely different story. But even if not, they had already managed to destroy and steal so much. The goblin pulled out a chest, lifting it, spoke that they were very sorry, and that they were ready to pay for everything they took, but not with lives. Alt took advantage of the moment and asked if they were ready to help in that case, to which they agreed. Alt and Rudia exchanged joyful glances, and then the young man shouted loudly to attract the attention of both the goblins and the people. Everyone shuddered and turned around, looking at the boy in surprise. He introduced himself as Altostan, and assured that the Lord had appointed him to turn these lands into a prosperous city, where monsters and people could peacefully and mutually beneficially coexist. The villagers excitedly whispered among themselves. They recognized the boy, he was the royal animal trainer. Then they realized that the dragon they had just seen belonged to Master Alt. The young man added, the goblins had just surrendered and would no longer fight. He shouted that they promised to do everything in their power for the bright future and development of this small town. From now on, they were all friends and would build this city together. One of the goblins voiced this, assuring everyone that the stolen money was on site, almost 1,000,000 gold. But as soon as Alt turned around, he saw. Rudia had already firmly grabbed the chest and was not going to give it back. She shouted that the young man must use this money only on God Gacha and nothing else. She explained if he paid for gacha, he could summon even more incredible SRs and even gods up to Bahamut. He could even pull out a super talented god of her class. Alt was completely shocked by his companion's behavior. He noted that this was the villagers' money, and he planned to earn by his own work to develop and improve. Rudia cried, unwilling to give up the gold she had received, but her reasoning was interrupted by one of the villagers. Someone was shouting at the top of their lungs that the fire was still burning, and if it continued, it would spread to the forest. The goblin grabbed him by the head, apologized, and immediately ordered everyone to quickly fetch water from the river to extinguish it. But Rudia noticed such a wonderful opportunity and declared that with the power of Master Alt, the flame could easily be extinguished, and he would handle this problem in a moment. The young man himself froze, not understanding what was happening. The girl explained that he must properly apply his Bahamut skills. The boy quickly understood what it was about. He had already acquired the Divine Flame skill, the ability to burn only a clearly defined target. The young man ordered everyone to retreat from the fire, and when the peasant stood behind him, he announced that he was beginning to use the skill of Divine Flame. Bundles of magic rushed straight to the burning city. In an instant, the magic seemed to absorb the fire. Only steam and smoke remained, which vanished just as quickly. The residents began to celebrate joyfully. There was no more fire, so their homes were safe. Rudia and Alt were also delighted and rejoiced with everyone. Meanwhile, far from this place in the very dungeon of purgatory, someone was shouting indignantly that it was too hot here. This loud guy is Count Namekil Austin. He was chewing something, and sweat was literally dripping down his face. Then one of his companions reported that they had heard about the heat in this place. But the Count angrily began to pour out his rage on the girl. Hearing how he scolded his comrade for not blowing on him energetically enough and for chilling him too much, he climbed higher into the mountains. After climbing a bit, he shouted loudly that all these adventurers were complete nonsense. A little later, he asked if Bahamut, whom they were looking for, had already arrived. One of those accompanying him replied that the dragon should be here any moment. Taking a deep breath, Namekil ordered to show him the way, simultaneously insulting his companions. But as soon as everything turned around, he quickly got confused and asked them to wait, with a cunning face, as if he already had a plan. He approached the Magath's smallest girl among them and embraced her, assuring that she must carry him because he was a nobleman with the strongest skill of Dragonbinder. Yet the same sorceress was by no means glad and screamed in pain. Her comrades quickly got up and demanded that she not do this because she did not like it. One of the boys sat down, lowering his head, and said that if the Count was tired, he could take on the role of the girl and carry him. But still, Namekil only grew angrier at such words, and striking the young man with a whip, shouted as if commoners dared to challenge him. The adventurer staggered and from the strong blow fell to the ground. The witch rushed to her brother and shouted that all this was pure trouble. Then the boy tried to calm Rin, insisting that everything was fine. The Count jumped onto a higher ledge and laughed, ordering his companions to do as he said, because they found themselves in a very difficult dungeon with an S-level danger, so they were not allowed to quarrel among themselves. Then one of the adventurers gave a crooked smile and said that if the Count continued to bother them and behave like that, especially towards Rin, he would definitely report it to the Adventurers Guild. The sly snake seemed to ask who wanted to snitch on him, then struck the company of plebeians and shouted that he would simply expel them all from the guild. He threatened that he was capable of this because he was from the Austin family and had power. Adventurer companions who accompanied the boy noted with disappointment. His brother, Master Alt, had become a great dragon slayer, so they did not expect such behavior from his twin. The face of the Count's son twisted with rage. He demanded again what exactly they had told him there. But suddenly someone interrupted the scuffle. His threatening voice echoed around. The stranger declared that he was dissatisfied with how these fools were trampling his sanctuary. Namekil turned around and saw behind him Bahamut the Divine Dragon. The creature glared fiercely at the newcomers and, rising into the air, loomed over them with a threatening shadow. The boy shouted at the monster at the top of his lungs that he was Namekil Austin, a great dragon tamer who came here to become a master of Bahamut, and fiercely clenched his fist. He demanded that the Divine Dragon obey him. The state was completely shocked by such impudence. The dragon turned around and asked if this insolent young man really considered himself his master. He could not contain his anger and roared at the top of his lungs that all this was complete nonsense, and this man must know his place. After that, he simply threw him off the cliff and he screamed terribly as he fell down. He fell and landed face down on a stone. Getting up, he noticed blood flowing from his nose. His comrades rushed to him to check if he was alive and how he was feeling. The young man rolled on the ground, shouting at the top of his lungs and demanding that something be done about this problem immediately. One of the travelers ordered the count to calm down and assured him that they would stop the bleeding immediately. But it was not so important because there was a much more serious trouble. Bahamut gathered his power into a fireball and prepared to strike. The squad of adventurers noticed this without hesitation. They immediately darted away, because they simply could not stand and wait for the dragon's blow to hit them too. The count, crawling on the ground, ordered to wait. He could not simply be left here. When Rin said that one cannot abandon their client and that he was already beyond help, the young man burst into tears and shouted that he was Namikal Ostinso. They were obliged to save him. The dragon laughed and assured him that he was terribly pathetic because even his own comrades had abandoned him. The count could only press himself to the ground, cover his head with his hands, and shout loudly. When the strike he was waiting for did not come, Namikal lost his train of thought, raised his head, and saw that Bahamut had already stopped gathering forces for the attack. The dragon said that his true master had called, so he is leaving. The divine being noted that the dragon's master saved the life of this miserable man. The boy continued looking up, tears and blood flowing, then asked if this dragon was just called a summoner. He smiled and added that it was simply impossible, because even with his abilities he could not just take and summon a dragon like that. Who is capable of such a Thinjevan brother? Alta did not guess. The dragon flew away and the travelers scattered and Namikal was left sitting alone in the emptiness of the mountains. He thought, who could even do such a thing? At that time he still knew nothing. Thanks to the brilliant idea of using dragons to tame monsters, everything should have seemed simple, but a dark cloud was already looming over Alta's head, although he was not yet aware of any danger. Neither about his brother's affairs, nor about the fact that the monsters of the royal court, having lost Alta, had already begun to express their dissatisfaction and, of course, this could definitely bring inevitable death to the Austen family. Meanwhile, Alt remembered his father's words. He said that a young man should not worry because his brother, who mastered the skill of taming dragons, Namikal, was already here. A fragment of a phrase about altars being driven out, and that if dragons can still be tamed, then lower creatures can be tamed too, surfaced in that boy's mind and caused a sad smile. He sighed heavily. Despite being expelled, he still reached the village that was given to him and even grew fond of it. As a result, the next night after the goblin attack, the village held a welcome party for Alt and his group. Goblins and humans celebrated together. They spun around the fire, danced, ate, and drank. As if there had never been any hostility before, they could sit side by side and talk calmly. The young man wondered how humans and goblins could celebrate something together and make such noise when, besides rebuilding the village and providing food for all residents, they had nothing left. Alt was interrupted from his thoughts by an old man who offered him something. The residents cheerfully talked about what had happened recently. Some were amazed that even the dragon obeyed this boy, others thanked him for help and salvation. There were also those who thought, since goblins were no longer their enemies, there was definitely hope in this world. And when Alt was poured some sake into a glass, he admitted he did not know how to respond to everything they told him. The man was sure he was simply lucky. He believed that the appearance of Rudia and Bahamut on his side was purely a coincidence of luck, which he gained from the skill he chose through God Gacha. Then the boy was brought a meat dish. It was worth trying before it cooled down. Alt immediately noted that it looked very appetizing. He put a piece into his mouth, chewed, and said he liked it very much but still noticed something strange. The dish had no flavor at all, and there was definitely no salt or pepper in the preparation. If you looked closely, the broth was full of venison given to them by the goblins, but there were almost no vegetables. He turned to the girl who brought the soup and said she had prepared a very tasty dish. But in a moment he noticed, she was not well at all, her fingers were bandaged, and the girl herself was dressed in a cheap, worn-out dress. Looking around and then at his glass, Alt quickly realized. Because of the cheap alcohol, everyone got drunk in an instant, and that was why there was so much noise here. The boy smiled and firmly understood. In this village, he still had a lot of work to do. Suddenly, someone loudly called the name Alt somewhere. It was Rudia. She hugged the conscript, grabbed the bottle, and kept shouting. She asked why he still hadn't started hooking up with all the girls standing around. She turned sharply and shouted that she was this man's wife, and if they dared to touch him, she would never forgive them. Sam Alt asked when they had managed to get married. The man sitting nearby said he couldn't even imagine where Alta got such a beautiful wife, and then asked when the young man managed to pick her up. Rudia covered her sagging face with her hands and noted that she had just been called a beautiful wife, and she felt uncomfortable as soon as she heard the truth. The boy simply turned his back and said that the story somehow twisted and developed on its own. Then Rudia struck her fist on her chest and promised, on behalf of the goddess of fertility, she would bring a bountiful harvest to this village, surprising everyone present. After these words, the company left the celebration and approached the berry tree. Its fruits could be used as material for healing medicines, but the trees were not blooming. Land was by no means fertile. She reached out her hand to the tree and suggested starting. Her gaze was full of determination as if something had already ripened in her mind that would surprise everyone. When she reached out her hand to the branch, she cast a spell. The branch flared with bright light, and as soon as the girl withdrew her hand, those gifts had already revealed berries behind them. But Alton and others began to examine the unknown fruits on the tree. They grew in just a few moments. Of course, everyone who arrived immediately rushed to try the new fruits after first asking whether these yanads were even edible. The young man, having tasted one berry, noted with surprise that it was impossible. He immediately felt the power spreading through his body and realized that the fruit was of excellent quality. Both goblins and humans noted that it was incredibly tasty and could hardly believe that trees were capable of growing such juicy fruits. Alt noticed that these berries heal even if eaten raw without any processing. Yes, this is truly an indispensable thing for travelers, so the boy asked Rudia how often she can do this. The goddess guessed that such a thing should not be done too often. The trees would quickly tire and the earth would become infertile. With a smile, she said that this can be done once every 10 days, and this definitely surprised the conscript. Joyful Rudia exclaimed that she has the power to control plants, but saw no point in letting them grow out of season. Alt noted that Rudia could indeed have been a goddess, but this only enraged the girl. She loudly screamed that she was already a goddess. People joyfully began to shout in honor of Rudia, but the same girl asked to be respected no more than everyone else. Approaching the young man, she placed her hand on him and said that he was the savior, chosen by the Creator, God. The young man modestly replied that the girl was exaggerating again, then smiled and took a sip of the delicious drink. Holding the remaining berry in his hands, he rejoiced. The great misfortune of this village suddenly disappeared thanks to Rudia. It turned out to be a good beginning. The next day, the work on something was already completed. It turned out the guys had already managed to build a kennel for Snezek, and it became a real home for the village Ulta's guard dog. Snowball himself was also delighted and returned to his master. He joyfully thanked for the new home, to the surprise of even Alt himself. He unmistakably understood what the dog was saying. In the magic book that showed abilities, it was written, "The trainer's skills have increased and now Alt could understand the language of monsters." While the young man carefully figured out his new ability, reading the explanation, the snow globe informed him that it was getting too hot outside, so it wanted to cut its hair. The young man agreed and decided they would try to trim the dog's fur. Alt found out that the tools were in the yard and went there with his favorite pet. And after some time, Snowball already had a new haircut. It was supposed to help him suffer less from the heat. When the work was finished, Alt decided that maybe they could even sell the wool. He carefully gathered it and wrapped it in cloth. Meanwhile, the children approached the dog and asked to ride on his back. Snowball happily agreed and did so, saying something. The young man standing nearby conveyed to the others the dog's intention to protect everyone in this village. Alt, having removed the fur, went to put away the tools with which he had trimmed the huge dog, and as soon as he finished cleaning, Rudia called out, "Guests have arrived." The merchant painters gladly greeted Alt, Rudia, and the rest of the villagers. The goddess asked who was standing in front, and one of the boys explained, "This is an honest merchant who happily wags his tail when he is well." The new leader of this village shook the merchant's hand, thanked him for coming to this remote place, and warmly welcomed him. He also did not forget to introduce himself, Alt Austin, the new lord of Silesia. After everyone got acquainted and greeted each other, they started talking about business. Alt asked if next time they could buy food for the monsters and sell it. The shopkeeper said he could definitely provide that and asked how much they needed. The boy explained. He wanted to order the highest quality food, like from royal suppliers, for 100,000 gold. To the merchant's surprise, he told them that there would be even more monsters in the future and that he wanted them to have a good life. The merchant bowed his head and said he understood everything, and Alt added that he wanted to ask him to buy something. On the ground lay 2 open boxes, in one healing berries and in the other white wolf fur. The merchant surrounded the boxes and carefully examined the goods. They really liked the color and shine of the wool, as well as how the berries affected it. After finding out that the goods were in 3 boxes, the merchant assured they were ready to buy everything, and this clearly surprised Alt. One of the merchants explained, "These berries at this time of year are of the highest quality, and the wool will have a strong protective effect." Alt bowed and honored the interlocutor, thanking him respectfully. They laughed happily for them. It was a very profitable deal. Rudia only silently observed the parties, not expecting that they would find common ground so easily. The shopkeeper noted that having out-of-season berries is pleasant, and that the offer of monster food suited him, but he was still troubled by the question, who exactly was the person before them? He did not particularly believe that a goblin could be so friendly. And yet, one of the same goblins standing nearby asked the shopkeeper if he knew anything important. He told them that Austin is a famous aristocrat, the royal monster hunter. Hearing this, the merchants became excited with joy. Austin is an indispensable client with the highest priority, so they needed to keep Alt happy. The young man awkwardly ran his hand through his hair and admitted he was almost completely detached from his parental home. And although they called him an aristocrat, it was still only in words. He added that when he turned 18 and the skills he had acquired were not very good according to the head of the Austin family, he was simply cast out onto this land. So he thinks it will be difficult to establish contact with the Austin family. Then the merchant smiled and said that, although they did not know the circumstances, they still wanted to establish a personal relationship with Mr. Alt. After all, in their opinion, he could quite possibly turn Silesia into a wealthy land, and they see that. Alt awkwardly thanked him only for the kind words. A little later, the boys entered the forest and started talking, discussing the recent meeting with the merchants. The merchants all seemed good-natured, and the sale of berries was too pleasant. With such a quantity, one could earn well and advance gacha. Alt thanked Rudia for now not having to worry about food. Ultimately, thanks to her, a field was created where signs of village development are visible. As soon as he has time, he will definitely try paid gacha again. Hearing this, the goddess asked again if Alt was speaking truly. She joyfully rushed to hug the boy and assured him that she loves him. From such unexpected actions, the young man blushed embarrassedly and twitched awkwardly. The boy remembered so much had happened during this time. And also yesterday the girl asked him to sleep with her, although Alt firmly refused. The goblin noticed that Rudia was incredibly clingy to him, and this, of course, angered the girl. She shouted loudly and asked how he dared to say such a rude thing. While they were arguing, Alt turned to Snowball and asked what exactly he had noticed. He asked if the white wolf could hear honey, because it was extremely important for them to find honeycombs in this forest. While the goblins were guessing whether they were really looking for honey, Rudia, who had fallen behind Alt, rushed to him like a whirlwind and assured him that she really loved sweets. The young man said that this idea was suggested to him by people from Inayanu. While they were still in the village, the boy asked the merchant if he had any business in mind. Alt explained that he wanted to prepare a dish that would become a signature for this place. The shopkeeper thought about his words for a long time and carefully, and the one who stood nearby suggested thinking about the honey bear, and it really seemed like a great idea. Alt asked in surprise if this bear really existed, and then he was told exactly where to look for it. The merchant admitted that they themselves had never been to those parts, but had heard a lot from travelers who had already passed there. He also added, if the guys managed to tame it, a whole big industry awaits them, and then he asked when they would be able to complete the production of their special products to allow them to buy it. Rudia asked in surprise if that was exactly why they came to the forest. Alt explained that their goal was the honey bear, because forest bears love honey and they have a habit of storing it. And the honey they collect becomes even sweeter. The goblins in Rudio were very surprised as soon as they heard this. And Elt added that all the honey used in the royal confectionery comes from these bears. The goddess immediately became interested in this topic, and asked if they could prepare various delicious cakes and sweets afterwards. The young man explained that if everything went as planned, they would be able to sell this honey, so it was important for them to tame such a bear. The girl was already imagining in her head how many sweets she would like to eat. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by Snowball. He said he smelled a sweet scent. Walking along the path, the company reached a flower meadow. It looked simply enchanting. And when they looked closer, they saw a large beehive on one of the nearby trees. For this find, Alda petted the white wolf and praised him for excellent work. Meanwhile, Rudia decided to take the honey herself, despite Goblin's attempts to dissuade her. The girl smiled and assured that the bees were descendants of the goddess of fertility. If she had known this earlier, she would only have wanted to share the honey with everyone. And the goblins asked if the purpose of their journey was not to tame the bear, but the girl did not listen to them. Approaching the hive, the girl bent down, smilingly asked the bees to give her just a minute, and then said she wanted to take just a little honey. But the bees were not happy about this meeting at all. One of them immediately stung the girl right in the nose. The goddess screamed piercingly from pain and rage. She definitely did not expect this. She instantly ran away from the swarm of angry insects. And at that moment, Alt noticed her. The girl stood stunned and surprised by this foolish prank. Tired of running around the flower field, Rudia asked the young man to help her and used the skill Divine Flame. The man froze in confusion. He did not expect to encounter attacking bees, not even thinking twice. He asked the white wolf to go help Rudia. The dog quickly picked up the girl on his back, helping her escape from aggressive bees that were simply trying to protect their honey from unexpected guests. Rudia and Snezhka ran further into the depths of the forest to escape from the attacking insects, while the Tagger and goblins decided to catch up with them by taking a detour. Later the boys were able to reunite. The goddess looked into the mirror through tears and did not understand why this was happening. The girl's nose was very swollen and red. This definitely irritated her. And then Podum quietly said that they had not come for honey at all. The goblins discussed how the honey gathered and preserved by the bear was too sweet, so it turned out the goddess's action made no sense at all. The girl just sat with her face hidden while Alt tried to calm her down somehow. Suddenly Snowball called everyone to look at the flower garden where Rudia was attacked. The great bear with a pot in its teeth carefully walked straight to that very tall one. It was the same honey bear the boys had come here for. He sat opposite the hive, carefully holding his jar and quietly growling, not taking his eyes off the bees. Looking back intently, the boys realized. In front of them stood a honey bear, and it was carrying in its paws an object that looked very much like a small cauldron. It was somewhat like a raccoon, but not at all as they had imagined. Alt immediately noted that it was a real honey bear, then, stretching out his hand, pointed to the object he was holding in his paws. It was a huge honey barrel that had cracked apart over many years. The goblins stared at the bear in amazement. He gathered honey in this vat and then took it all for himself. The company decided to watch how he did it, then fell silent to avoid drawing attention. The bear, surrounded by bees, swung his paw and growled loudly, wishing himself bon appetit. He thrust his hand into the beehive and was already starting to pull out honey, while the bees meanwhile surrounded him in a tight ring and tried to defend themselves. While the insects stung him, he did not even flinch. It turned out that his fur repelled the bees. After a brief watch, Alt boldly crawled out of the hiding place, decided to tame the honey bear, but this act scared the goddess, shouted that it was dangerous, although she had done the same before. The boy loudly called the bear and caught its attention. The bear turned its head and looked at the one who called it. The young man grabbed a huge barrel and declared that it was much stronger than the one the bear held in its hands. Then he promised he would give it to the creature if it became his familiar. Miss Ka was clearly interested and ran closer to see what they were being offered. Alt decided to show, even if you drop this barrel, it won't break. It was a special cauldron bought from a new tribend magic was cast on it so it wouldn't crack, even if dropped or hit. The young man thought that buying such a cauldron earlier was truly a good idea. Honey Bear rushed to Altu and cried, saying that he really needed this fat because last time, when he broke his honeypot, he was so sad. The Alta team continued to watch from the ambush, and the guys noticed. It seems the bear and that boy understand each other. And that means the young man can talk to this creature without problems. The trainer's level has increased. Meanwhile, he continued persuading the bear with honey. The bear seemed to understand and realized that a jar of honey was worth nothing to him. He said that they can provide a safe place to sleep and 3 meals of the highest quality every day, and then asked what the interlocutor thinks about it. Miss Ka, looking at his new barrel, admitted that this offer was very good, and that with this cauldron he could quickly find himself a wife. Even the ambush team saw hopeful promises in the bear's smile. The bear and Alt shook hands with each other, and the former said that he would rely on the other. Then the young man thanked him for his trust. He turned to those who were waiting for him and confirmed with a gesture his words. He had succeeded. Everyone rejoiced that the boy tamed the bear just by talking to it, and now they would have honey. Molodik told the creature that he was incredibly happy to be friends with him, then asked if he could get some honey for his village. The bear confirmed that it was possible and added that they would manage to gather a whole pile of honey. Meanwhile, someone was watching everything from a tree. The man, who was not recognized, shouted loudly and jumped down, aiming his sword directly at Alta's new friend. Everyone froze in horror. It seemed no one expected this. And just as the blade was very close, a goblin appeared in the air shielding the bear with his shield. This time the attacker was confused. He even asked if someone was really going to interfere with his hunt. Then another goblin shouted that they were strengthening the defense, and all three lined up around Alt and their new friend. He asked them to stop the attack, and while the bear thanked its rescuers, the man irritably asked if the one before him was really the one who tames bears and who hides in the shadows and steals others' profits. He shouted loudly that he hated people like him and rushed headlong into battle. Goblins, of course, asked to stop and speak with their master differently, so they boldly set about defending him. But the man, calling them simply small fry, scattered them in different directions. The goblins were defeated and lay on the grass, trying to recover from the wounds they had suffered. The man laughed at the fact that the boy ahead was such a skillful rider that even goblins followed him, and then, preparing to leave, exclaimed, "Later I will find out where the treasure is, and I will definitely come for it." Rudia jumped out of the hiding place and asked how the boys were feeling. Feelings mixed. The girl looked at the man in surprise and at the same time irritated and asked who he was. The man carefully looked around and explained that he had come for the naked honey and the goblin's treasure, then asked if this girl was somehow connected to the treasure. Rudio was furious, and the man was simply amazed that this young guy could even have such a beautiful girl. He quickly realized that this man was not one to talk to, so he immediately raised his sword. With a stone expression, Alt drew his weapon, raised it forward, and said that if this man intends to harm his friends or Rudia, he cannot even expect mercy. Throwing his sword behind his back, the blonde asked if this boy knew who was standing before him. It was the fencer Gain and partly an A-rank adventurer. He swung his sword and rushed at Alt, loudly asking if this clever, brave man had enough courage to face someone like him. Alt managed to block with his sword and the crack of breaking steel stunned everyone for a moment. Jane continued to attack, pushing him to act, and noticed that he was not even fighting at full strength. It was clear the man already expected the boy to lose and was smirking maliciously. The treacherous traveler threatened to embarrass the young man before his beautiful companion and strip him of all his clothes, humiliating the boy with this gesture. Snowball decisively rushed to help his master, but Alt did not let the dog come closer and ordered to retreat and keep away. It was too dangerous. The boy stretched out his hand and used the skilled divine flame. Mana instantly gathered around the pommet was even visible. The man glanced in surprise and asked what kind of magical effect it was. But the flame engulfed his weapon, and even the strong metal could not withstand the magical fire. It simply burned in the traveler's hands, causing him to freeze in shock. Gathering his strength, the man raised his fist to strike. He immediately felt this was no ordinary opponent, so he asked who this boy was. Alt summoned Bahamut. The sky and earth seemed to tremble as a power appeared and a huge creature emerged right before him. About Hein, from nowhere emerged a huge and terrifying dragon, causing the enemy to shudder and retreat backward. The man could not even stay on his feet and almost fell, losing his balance. Balance? He was completely frozen with horror at what he saw, and he could only ask, "What is this?" The dragon calmly looked around, then began to watch the man carefully as if to say, if anyone stands against his master, that one must disappear. That's it? Alt shouted that he just wanted to take the armor off that man. Bahamut said he understood everything and began to carry out the order. And that man only looked fearfully at his opponent, not understanding how everything happened exactly like that. He covered himself with his hands in a desperate attempt to save himself and protect himself. The dragon leaned forward a little, opened its mouth and spat fire directly at Alt's opponent, who only screamed terribly. The man, confident in his victory, lost left without all his armor and growled that he did not like it and did not understand what kind of power this was. But as soon as he got up from his knees, he noticed he was no longer wearing clothes, and this alone outraged him. A dead silence hung here. The man stood motionless, silently looking at his opponent and his terrible dragon. Alt also waited silently until Gain calmed down. The young man noted, if someone lost their weapon and armor, then they no longer have any chance to win, so they must humbly surrender and admit defeat. Gain fell to his knees again and bowed his forehead to the ground, admitting that now he definitely surrenders. Alt himself was even surprised by such a sudden change, but Bahamut, on the contrary, as if used to it, did not react at all. Finally, having dealt with all the problems, the guys returned home and even took a new friend with them. The locals were already happily greeting Alt and Rudia and asking how they were doing, while the newcomer was initially not noticed at all. Not at all. The man approached the group and handed them something. He offered to look at Alta. She was grown in one day, and he boasted that she even tastes great. Then he asked how they were doing and if they managed to tame the honey bear. The young man confirmed that everything went as it should, and it even seemed that the bear liked the hollows on the edge of their village. As soon as the honey bear saw this tree and the hollow in it, he immediately assured that he would collect honey here, after which he smiled. Alt noted that the bear was useful to them, so now he can start working on dishes for the village, to which the bear assured that it was mutual. He admitted that he no longer felt lonely here. He has snowballs and other various friends, so he is waiting for the opportunity to live here. The worker noted that rumors about Alt as the tamer of the royal palace had reached even remote areas, but everything was as expected. The boy thanked everyone for their cooperation. Then Jane noted that she was surprised by the boy's ability to talk to monsters. When one of the residents asked who he was, the man silently turned in the opposite direction. People murmured that they were seeing him for the first time and that he looked like a suspicious person. Jane tried to justify herself. With a serious face, he assured that he had now become the new vassal of Lord Alt Jane. But Rudia interrupted him and said that the man had attacked them in the forest, and apparently he was an adventurer of rank A. The girl said that they managed to fend him off only thanks to Alt's skills. She recalled how Jane had previously apologized for his behavior, assured that he did not know who he was, a nobleman, and then begged to make him Alt's vassal. The boy himself promised to think about it because the population of their village was still very small. About 150 people live in the village, including goblins, but there is a severe shortage of labor. There are other powerful monsters in the forest, for example, dark elves. Human resources from which strength can grow are welcomed. Even the goblins agreed and said, if Alt says so, they will accept it. Alt says that although he is a vassal, he is paid too little. Another replies that Alt will one day achieve great success and that the blessing is to sit on the butt of the winning horse. The girl does not believe this. The girl asks the boy if he is really a traveler and not just a bandit. The boy replies, no way. At that moment, a man appears and shouts if this is Jane. The man says he would not confuse this voice with anyone else. Jane is surprised. This boy is from the hotel, and the man shouts that the boy did not pay for either the room or the alcohol. The man continues shouting that Jane was dating his daughter, and the boy was told never to come to that village again. The boy, sitting on his knees, denies it, then apologizes and says he was wrong. Jane apologizes and says she will cry. The girl standing behind him smiles and looks at him. The girl asks what he lied about. Hayne asks why the girl is smiling like that. She exclaims further, even if he didn't return the money to the old man, would he deserve a reward? Those who approached are surprised to learn about the reward. Rudia smiles and tells Gain to pay a fine of 100,000 gold. The man is surprised. The man asks about the fine and says that his actions and this amount clearly do not match. Rudia is outraged. The girl, looking angrily, says that if the criminal became a vassal of the altar and was not punished. In shock, Jane asks if he is a criminal. Rudia replies, if this is wrong, should she call goblins and a bear? The girl continues to insist that the boy tried to kill the cute bear, chased goblins, stabbed the altar with a sword, spent money on lodging, and attacked her. The men looked at Hayne with angry, threatening expressions. Look, Rudia sits down and looks at him. She says he paid, otherwise she will throw him in jail. Alt replies that the girl has gone too far. The girl, sighing, says she needs money for Alt's dream. The hero doesn't even know who among them is the villain. Jane says he understands. The man sitting on the ground replied that he did something evil against the old man, so let him be the scapegoat and pay for it with bloodletting. Jane puts a bag of money on the ground. Round, Rudia, throwing money in all directions, joyfully triumphs and tells Alt that they returned the money he gave them, and now he can pay for the gas. The girl asks if it is possible to return the stolen money after the gacha ends. She is told yes. The main heroine is asked if she is the embodiment of the devil. Alt says that if the village develops, then the salary will be raised. He says that then he will use this opportunity, pay for it, and call the god Gacha. The old man asks Jane if he has finally learned the lesson. The boy answers, yes. People wondered who would be named next. A crowd stood near the circle. Goblin puts a chest with money on the ground. Hero says that about 900,000 gold remains. Alt pours coins from the bag into the chest and says there is 1 million gold there. Guy adds that if you count, including Jane's money, the protagonist looks at the open chest, says that this is almost all his wealth, and thinks that one must have courage to throw it all away. Everyone thinks that when a creature like Rudia or Bahamut appears, it will pay off well. Everyone watches him. The hero says, we'll see, and summons a charge. They insert 1 million gold. The protagonist calls Gacha to open. A flash of light strikes the circle. Jane is surprised. The children also freeze from this glow. Rudia says she appeared and she is here. Alt looks at the circle in shock. Next to the circle, some sound is heard. The hero captivates goblins and people, and they all look at the circle. Smoke bursts out of it. A hand holding a wooden bucket is shown. Rudia freezes in surprise. She is surprised. Kyuzuku holds a wooden bucket with bathing equipment in one hand, and the goddess of hot springs says that she has already come. Her rarity is SR. Jiuzuka, squeezing the bucket with her hands, grabs the hero and asks if he is her owner. Hayne asks if the girls know each other, because Rudia and Kyuzuka met for the first time in 2,000 years and both look at them the same way. The goddess of hot springs is also surprised. Rudia, hugging her, explains that Kyuza is her vassal goddess, and she is like a younger sister to her. The girl asks the goddess of hot springs to spread the wonders of hot springs from this village all over the world. Kyuzuka says long life to the hot bath, and Alt looks at her with surprise. Kyuzuka asks to show her power and the earth begins to tremble. The protagonist asks in surprise if this is an earthquake. Rudia joyfully replies that this is N. The girl replies that this is a new friend and water bursts from beneath the earth. People standing nearby gape in surprise and watch this. People are amazed. Near the wooden houses, 3 columns of water suddenly appear. Houses, Jane says that the water is too hot. Alt insists, this is not water, this is hot springs, and you see him laughing, covering his mouth with his hands. The goddess says, if you are under the influence of hot springs, your mana and health will be restored, and stats will double for 24 hours. Hours pass. Jane says in surprise that this is a colossal effect. Everyone agrees with him and opens the status window. A window with doubled stats pops up on the screen. The main character freezes in amazement. Surprised, villagers rejoice at the increased stats. They say they feel 10 years younger, and the enhancement effect is simply incredible. Jane says he was a fool for rating F. Battle Kudzuhua explains, the healing springs cure everything except a heart broken by love. The boy suggests making the village a place where everyone can heal wounds or safely level up. The goddess agrees. Degrees, standing under the water, goblins say that here they can build an impregnable fortress and that the water is so pleasant. The boy exclaims, with the right skill you can even resist a dragon. Alt asks if the spring can be used to heal monster wounds, and you feel her answer that it can. Rudia says that these springs are loved by the gods, so even humans and monsters can benefit from them, and Kyuza is almost like a sister to her. The girl hugging Kyuza says to look at the power of the goddesses from the gacha, and also asks if it is scary. The protagonist rejoices and says that he is afraid, not a word, but a feeling, and seems to have understood what is worth paying for in the gacha. He thanks Rudia. The girl blushes. The girl says with disgust that this is already a mixed open-air bath. Kyuzaihi insists that this is beyond cure. Alt rejoices, the power of the spring works even on Sneezek. The dog says that the pond looks wonderful. The goddess tells both that she is going to build a hot spring, attract a bunch of customers, and make this place famous. The protagonist said that they need to divide the duties, freely perform them, listen to Kyuzuha's instructions, and do everything with the dignity of the village. Rudia agreed, the others also agreed. Alt said he would go ask the bear. The bear appears. Alton and Rudia are surprised. The bear points at them. The bear makes sounds. The hero translates and says that the bear ordered to rely on him. The residents are surprised by the change in character. Alt says that it is decided and it is time to get down to business. The whole village took up building a hole. In the royal capital at the Adventurers Guild, a boy shouts at her and asks if she is joking. The girl replies that Mr. Austin committed a serious violation of the terms, so she cannot introduce the boy to the adventurers. After all, the S-rank traveler Wolf of Dawn, who was introduced earlier, was subjected to cruel treatment. She was whipped and forced to carry a boy on her back. The boy says that she did everything wrong. The girl says that such behavior in a dangerous dungeon is cynical insolence, and the guild refuses to admit adventurers to Mr. Na. A man shouts that he is Namakal, the tamer of the royal palace, and if the girl goes against him, she goes against the king. The kingdom, the girl explains. The Adventurers Guild is a supranational organization, so it is independent of the kingdom and not obliged to follow the orders of the nobility. The boy looks at her angrily. Irritated, Namiko laughs and asks if the girl understands what she said. If this continues, the monsters kept in the royal palace will get out of control and start causing a lot of trouble. The girl asks if it is true that Namakal is the heir of the honorable tamer family from the house of Count Austin. She also asks if taming monsters is not for food. Namakal answers that it is for that, and he thinks so because he always left his brother to take care of the monsters, and his taming level is level 1. The guard is attacked by monsters in the royal palace. Evil, rabid. The boy wonders if he can use his natural strength to tame the beasts if his brother's power has completely disappeared. The man thinks he must tame the dragon and suppress the monsters as soon as possible. A female silhouette fiercely shouts that the Austin family is doing something that will take away their noble title. The boy cries and thinks that the Austin family is destroyed. He tells the girl that he is in a hurry and wants to tame the dragon immediately. The girl says that Mr. Namakal will still not be allowed into the Adventurers Guild and asks him to leave. The man shouts that he has money, any amount, as much as needed. And he recalls, somewhere there were adventurers who would do dirty work for a certain sum. He also heard that there is an A-rank adventurer named Jane. The girl says that the Travelers Guild will not go for that, and the prophet has already gone to Silesia. Namakal shouts that in this world money and power decide everything and asks what this is. A man throws coins at a girl and continues shouting that wouldn't a woman be happy if her partner was an influential and wealthy man. Dude, he says she has a lot of money and orders her to call Hein. The woman's face flashes with anger. She shouts that her patience has run out and asks two guys to take Namakal away from her sight. The guy is dragged outside and he shouts what they are doing. The men ask him to leave. Namakal's leaves fall, but he insists that this is not the end. The guild has nothing but trash, and he will burn it to ashes with the help of his dragon. Someone's hand rests on the guy's shoulder. The man turns sharply, but he is hit accurately in the face. A group of people shout angrily. They heard the conversation inside and know that the guy was bothering Rin from the Wolf of D. Dawn. They continue shouting that Namakail should not offend travelers and that they love Rin. They say one hit is not enough and who would accept a request from such a person. Namakail was expelled from the guild, and he is against the travelers. The man asks if the girl is okay and requests restorative magic. Nearby they try to calm the enraged animal. The girl asks who her trainer is now. The man replies that Namakail belongs to the Irla Austin family. The girl with blood on her hand orders him to call Paula. Palace. After 3 days, Alt says he feels good and returns to life. The hero marvels that they managed to build the hotel so quickly and says the stars are incredibly beautiful. Kuzuhu exclaims, that's why hot springs are the best. Alt is surprised by her appearance. The goddess explains, mixed bathing in ancient times was common because hot springs were places where men and women gathered and socialized. The protagonist exclaims that he is in a bathing suit. Kuzuha asks what is wrong with him. The goddess says the boy has a bright red face. Alt explains, he is a bit dizzy. Kuzuga pulls the hero out of the well and says he needs to lie down because the blood rush could lead to death. Rudia comes and calls Alto to go swimming together. Together, the girl sees Kuzuko with the hero and angrily asks what he was going to do. The goddess says she was pleased. The protagonist does not understand what she is talking about. Rudia looks at them angrily and suddenly rushes at the protagonist with a bucket in her hands. The girl strikes Alt in the solar plexus. Heroes begin to fall and Kuzu shouts that it is dangerous. The main character and the girls are lying in the water, and the bucket fell on the dog's head. It is also sitting in the water. Kuzuha says that the floor in the bathhouse is slippery and one must be careful. Rudia replies that she will be careful. Alt supports her. The protagonist says there was a misunderstanding. Rudia replies she understands and forgives him. Alt wonders what kind of relationship they have. The hero asks if they built a bathhouse for women. He is told that they built a bathhouse for both women and men. Hyuzuka says that this is a special bathhouse for servicemen. Servants. The goddess jokes that Alt and Rudia will have children. The girl tells Kuza to stop. Hyuzuka hopes that the number of clients will now increase and asks Alta to tame the buffalo. The goddess says that drinking milk after bathing is a proven way to enjoy the hot springs. Hyuzaka says they need to get milk. The hero replies that it sounds familiar to him. He explains the buffalo is a cow-type monster capable of producing the highest quality milk. Alt says that milk can also be used to make sweets. The goddess replies that she knows everything about hot springs. The protagonist thinks that taming the buffalo will help the village become richer and more pleasant and says he must try. The dog and the bear are also sitting in the hot baths. The hotel with baths has already been built. Alton and his friends are trying to tame the buffalo. Progress is growing. The goblin asks the hero how he liked the boots and says they are designed with an emphasis on ease of movement. Alt, looking at the new boots, says that the boots fit perfectly and can be used both in the field and in the forest. Jane apologizes that his clothes look so inconspicuous. The protagonist says it's okay and waits for him to show where the Moo Moo buffalo lives. Jane agrees. Alton and his friends successfully built a hotel with hot springs, and at Kuzuka's request, who wanted milk, they set out to find Buffalo Mew Mew in the fort. In the forest, Alton and Rudia ride on a dog and Hein goes ahead. The hero wonders what it is like to need a buffalo chest. Sounds can be heard from the ground. Grass monsters run across the grass. Rudia is shocked. Jane strikes the monsters with her sword. They retreat. The girl asks if these are buffaloes. Alt replies that these are just ordinary monsters. Rudia says that Jane can be trusted. He knows the way and will help. The dog agrees and adds that even though he was bad at first. The man, hunched over, replies that his abilities have grown all thanks to the hot springs. Alt asks him not to tear his clothes. The main character says that Silesia reminds him of a garden where one can walk without worries. The dog replies that it is indeed easy to pass through here. Rudia happily asks Heinz if it is not wonderful to know the whole forest. He replies that he only knows some places. The girl calls Al, who is sitting in front. The girl offers the hero cookies with honey, which the honey bear collected for them. She asks him to open his mouth and says, "How is it?" He replies, "Delicious." The girl is happy because she baked the cookies herself and says that she still has juice with honey. The protagonist insists that everything is incredibly tasty, but her face is too close to him. Jane laughs at the whole situation. The boy says that he is jealous of Mrs. Rudia and how Alt stays close. The dog replies that he is not against cookies either. The protagonist says that this is more like a picnic and asks to take a break if a suitable place is found. Heinz says that the Mew Mew Buffalo settlement is very close. Alt and his friends hear a girl screaming. The hero calls Snowball. The dog replies, "Leave it to me." Approaching, Alt and Rudio sees a man with a spear riding a running horse. A girl with a frightened expression sits next to a tree. The heroes approached closer. An unknown man lunged at the girl with a spear and roared for her to die. The girl closed her eyes in fear. Alt has no idea if this man's beast is a buffalo. The main hero releases divine fire at an unknown man. The flame scorches the spear. The man freezes in surprise. Alt says that he is the master of this place and will not allow anyone to act at their own discretion here. The stranger angrily shouts that he will not forgive the hero and asks Alt if he is trying to stop him. The main hero asks to wait and says that he can talk. Snowball orders the heroes to hold on tight. Bison snorts fiercely. Snowball and the monster collide head to head. Head first, using force, the dog throws the beast back. The stranger cannot believe it. The beast, losing consciousness, pins the man to the ground, and he cannot believe how the hero managed to knock off his buffalo muumuu. Rudia shouts angrily that as a goddess she cannot forgive the words of the man who wished death upon an unknown girl. Alt suggests Mew Mew Buffalo follow him. Buffalo looks at the hero. The stranger shouts at the beast, "Why is it not moving?" and orders it to get up. Then the buffalo bows to the hero, and the men are shocked. Control was suddenly snatched from him. Alt says the unknown man did not always treat the beast with love. The man shouts that the protagonist is stupid and dark elves are known as natural tamers. The hero notes, the elf looks like a human and he is a 9th level tamer. The elf notices the protagonist's angry look and wonders if he is from the Austen family and why the ruler of the kingdom ended up in such a place. The man says he was one step away from defeating the princess. Rudia, surprised, asks about the princess, and it turns out that the unknown girl is an elven princess. The dark elf confirms this and says that the heroes are drawn into a conflict between elves that has lasted over 2,000 years. He shouts that because of other elves, dark elves are enemies. The man orders the heroes to prepare. 3 assistants approach him. They tell the main man that they have finally caught up with him and ask if he killed Princess Tio. The elf and his army say that something terrible has happened, and now he will bury the heroes and the princess together. The hero asks Ruddy to heal the princess. The girl agrees and begins to heal. The main character also orders Snowball to protect the girls. The man introduced himself as Lord Altostan of Silesia and said that he will not tolerate conflicts in this forest. Alt asks the elves to stop the attacks and suggests talking. The elf asks what the hero will do alone and says there is no time for talks. He orders his people to attack the main character. Lord Austin says that he is not alone. Gaines swings his sword. The other elves shudder in amazement. Gaines raises his sword and says that he is a fencer who serves Lord Alt, and asks the dark elves to remember this. The hero raises his hand up and activates the skill Healing Steam, inherited from Kyuzuha. Steam swirls around Alt. He says the target is his friends and asks to double the attribute, and the elves do not understand what exactly is blinding them. The dark elves look surprised at Gaines' appearance and ask if this is the same Gaines, a swindler and womanizer who only thinks about money. The man frowns offended. The chief elf, covering his eyes with his hand from the steam flying towards him, ordered not to panic and to shoot the princess first. When the steam disperses, Alt appears before their eyes, his hand clenched into a fist, ready to strike the enemy. The dark elf is surprised. The main character system window pops up with doubled stats. Alt strikes the dark elf. The main hero strikes the dark elf and he flies away. The assistants are surprised. They thought he would just immobilize the enemy. But Alt is also shocked. It too believed it was enough to just bind the opponent. The snowball grabs the enemy by the cloak, pushes the elf back. He points a spear at the dog in fear. Dark elves flee in fear and shout who the heroes are, what strange power they have and whether they are really invulnerable. Ruddy looks at Snowball. Buffalo says that Snowball is cool. The elder elf releases a magical arrow and says that if only he could return with the princess's blood. Tio is horrified. Alt activates the divine flame skill, and behind him Jane raises her sword and prepares to fight. Fight! Divine flame burns the magical air. Did the arrow disappear? Asks the hero, but the silhouette of the arrow is still visible. He decides that it is pointless and pulls a sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. Alt calls Bagamut, shouting for him to appear. Behind him, a pillar of light flashes. A huge dragon emerges above the hero, looking directly at the main character. Because of the power of this dragon, the elves end up on the ground. Bahamut tells the dark elves that disobedience to his master would be foolish. The princess looks at the dragon in amazement, and Rudia sincerely rejoices at his appearance. The elves, seeing the dragon, prepare to retreat. Dark elves retreat. Alton and his friends watch as they withdraw. Jane thanks the dragon. He says he hasn't done anything yet and asks the boy whose side he is on. Jane replies that he is on their side and that he is a vassal of Lord Alta. Rudia laughs. The hero feeds the buffalo. The princess addresses the hero. Heroes, the girl bows and says that, although she does not know who they are, she thanks them for their help. She says her name is Tio and she is an elven princess. Tio asks if they are humans. The protagonist introduces himself, I am Alt Austin from Silesia, and says that they are his friends. Alt kneels down, bows his head and says he is glad. The princess is safe. Safe, the girl blushes and exclaims the name Alta. Rudia comes to understanding. She tells the princess that Alt is her husband and that she should not try to trap him. Tio does not understand what she is talking about. The hero stops Rudia and asks when they will manage to get married. The girl replies, the hero is her husband. The main hero asks the princess if she can come to the village to talk with them. Gain says there is delicious food and hot springs there. Tio agrees. Alt asks Mew Mew to come with them too. The buffalo thanks them and the princess also expresses gratitude for their kindness. The heroes stand in the forest. In the Austin estate, a hand knocks on the door. Someone orders you to enter. A young girl in a maid's outfit enters with a cake in her hands and apologizes. She is struck on the hand with a whip. The girl falls from the blow and the boy shouts angrily, "Why does it take her so long to make one strawberry cake?" The girl begins to apologize. The girl introduces herself as Lilina and says she was born into a poor lower noble family and has worked all her life as a maid in the family of Count Austin. In those happy days when Lord Alt was to become the next. Lilina continues to say that Mr. Alt was a very kind person, it was pleasant to work there, and she was happy to work for him. For him, the boy was angry, and the girl holding the cake raised her head and thought. After he acquired the skin of a dragon tamer, Mr. Namakil was chosen as the head of the family. Skill, the maid says that Mr. Alt was expelled, and that the hero disappeared. Mr. Namakil became a tyrant. Namakil says he longs for the times when Alt was nearby and curses the adventurers who defeated him. The man says that all travelers are accused of insulting Royal Highness and attacking him. They say they wronged him and are ready to go to prison. In prison, Namakil asks the maid if anyone was caught. Lilina says no and adds that the travelers who despised Lord Namakil were afraid of revenge and left the capital. The boy ordered them to be captured. Lilina says that His Highness the leader declared he does not intend to create any new problems. The boy shouts that it is exactly him the commoners laugh at and that he will have to retreat. Namakil asks if they have found any other dungeons in the country where dragons live, and says, if he does not tame one soon, he will become worthless and lose his ability. The girl says that near the border there is a dragon hotel, a place known since ancient times as the home of dragons. The boy immediately starts shouting that it is a mountain 9,000 meters high and how he can get to the dragon's nest. Lilina apologizes. The maid suggests taming a dragon lizard because it is the weakest type of dragon monsters. And they also say that they live in the grass, so they will not be hard to find. The man sitting on the bed said that there is no point in taming them and boasting about it, and ordered the girl to bring a strawberry cake and feed him. The maid took the plate with the cake and a fork. Namakil orders her to be sweet like his mother so that he would say, ah, and so that he could be fed a pastry. Feeding the boy, the girl thinks, if she had known that something like this would happen, she would have followed Mr. Alt to the outskirts. She heard that the outskirts are a dangerous place, full of evil monsters and demons, and that not going there was her mistake. After all, from now on the girl will have to serve Lord Namakil for her whole life. And this is not at all like a happy future. She thinks about everything. Ulta, Lilina wonders where Ulta is now and suddenly realizes he was her paradise. She wants to rush to him right now. The girl holds the strawberry cake and dips it with a fork. Suddenly someone bursts into Mr. Namakil's room and calls him. A man sits on the bed and asks what is needed. On the bedside table nearby, a strawberry cake. A man enters and says that a messenger from the royal palace has arrived. The man reports that a monster in the royal palace, it seems, bit Her Royal Highness Princess Anne on the arm. Namakil and Lilina are incredibly surprised by this news. He says that Her Royal Highness Princess Anne looks very angry, so Lord Namakilu was ordered to immediately come to the royal palace and justify himself. The boy is scared, and the maid is stunned. Shock, Her Royal Highness Princess Anne is a ruthless woman, known as the Ice Princess. But this boy thinks everything was supposed to go differently. Namakil believed that he needed to tame the strongest divine dragon Bahamut in the dungeon of Purgatory, and Princess Anne would say, wonderful. And then in the end, they would be married and he would rule this country. That is what he dreamed of. Approaching the door, the boy introduced himself. Namakil Austin. The door opened. On the chair sat the Ice Princess Anne. She asked if he was listening to her. Namakil thinks about Princess Anne. She shows him her bandaged arm and says she was bitten by a unicorn. The princess notes that if Alt were tamer, this would not have happened, and tells the boy that he does not follow the instructions for monster care. The girl asks if this means that the Earl Ost family intends to rebel against the royal family. The boy, kneeling, replies that he has been working hard for several days to tame the dragon. The boy says that as a result, he feels somewhat contemptuous of himself. The princess, tilting her head, asks where the important dragon has gone. Namakil nervously remains silent and does not answer. Her Royal Highness Princess Anne says that the boy has lost hope of dealing with the monsters, but still, there are no results. She also heard that he has problems with the Adventurers Guild and asks what he is doing. Namakal, pressing his hand to his chest, apologizes and swears that very soon he will definitely show results. Anne says, then this boy needs to do it immediately. He knows how cruel she is to those who are not hers. The girl, looking at the boy, says that she is beginning to think about depriving Namakal of the role of royal trainer. The man tries to justify himself. The princess sharply raises her hands and says that she is disappointed in him, that she had great hopes for him, and asks why the family of Count Austen exiled Alt to the outskirts. The girl continues to tell the boy that voices everywhere say he lacks strength, and she agrees with them. Namakal apologizes and says he is sorry. The princess says that the boy will be even more disgraced if she uses her power to return Alt as the royal palace trainer, and thinks about deporting Namakal and his children from the country, and adds that he The man, holding his hand on his chest, dropped to his knees. Down, Namakil angrily says that the hero is just an amateur. Clenching his fist, he thinks enraged that the princess wants their bodies to perish in the wilderness. The man extends a paper to the princess. Anna says that interesting reports have arrived from the settlers of Silesia. She states, Lord Altostan uses the divine dragon Bahamut as a summoned beast. Her Royal Highness continues to explain, even goblins obey this power. Namakil is stunned because even his highest skilled dragon tamer could not tame the summoned Bahamut. The boy recalls, at first his brother was not a summoner but a tamer, and then the dragon said that it seemed to have been summoned by the true master. The girl replied, now she confirms the truth of this statement. The princess says, if this is true, her father will choose Alt as her fiancé because the royal family needs strong heroes to fight other countries. Namakal is shocked that his brother is the princess's fiancé. The man falls to his knees and shouts, why? And through tears thinks that it was not supposed to happen this way. He thinks that he is a true hero. He tames the dragon, monsters should follow him, and the princess will marry him. But he says that the only thing he needs is to take control of the monsters in the royal palace. Now Mikkel shouts and angrily strikes his hand on the stone tile. The princess says that she has had enough of the boy and asks him to leave. The boy, sitting on the floor and looking down, replies that he takes it to heart. The door closes, and only the princess is visible in the frame. She sits at the table and rests her chin on her hand. They ask how did this happen? A crescent moon is visible in the sky. A man with a glass of wine in his hand says that it took a lot of effort and thinks Princess Anna Alt liked it more than she expected. The servant bows and prepares to close the door. A man with black hair and a beard asks if the hero managed to tame Bahamut and says that it is hard to believe. Then he adds, everything depends on the status of the Austen family. If Alt returns, he and Namakila will be driven out. A man with his hands on the table, where a box of chocolates and a newspaper lie, says that this is the end for him. He insists that he has retired and that he has maids whom he loves. He drinks wine and has no idea where exactly he went wrong. He thought that the dragon tamer Namakila was a skill that allowed one to unconditionally tame dragons, but the boy could not tame the divine dragon Bam. The man wonders if dragon trainer is exactly the skill they were waiting for, if this type of ability depends on the basic mastery of the trainer. He thinks that Alt cannot have such outstanding skills. The man is worried. Wine spills from the glass. A glass of wine filled to the brim remains on the table. The man takes it and drinks straight from the bottle, cursing. He recalls that rumors say Namakal can no longer hire adventurers. He has been blocked everywhere. The old man puts the bottle on the table and says that he has no choice. He must go and do something about it. But this is impossible because he has not appeared on the scene for a long time, and this only buys time. Time? He says that Alt is the only one who understands the nature and disposition of over 1,000 different monsters, and that he knows the traits of all the monsters in the royal palace. The man regrets and realizes that Alt was more favored by the Earl Austen family. He asks what he should do. The current head of the family is nervous. 2 days later, Dorian receives an unexpected letter from Alt on the outskirts. Mountains, forest, and wooden buildings surrounded by a fence are seen. Princess Tio asks that there be no people there. Rudia sits behind the altar and an elf walks behind him nearby. The elf is surprised. There are goblins there. Goblins notice the heroes and wave their hands joyfully. Jane says that the princess is shocked because Lord Alt is the strongest tamer who can even take control of monsters. Rudia adds that only a hero can do that. Alt feels uncomfortable from their praise. Tio, seeing how a human communicates with a goblin, cannot believe that goblins live alongside humans. According to elven legends, demons obey only the demon lord. She asks the hero who he is. Alt says that they, the elves, were frightened when they saw Bahamut. The elf asks who Bahamut is. Rudia replies that it is a dragon whom the main hero summoned in the forest. The elven princess asks if it was the divine dragon who fought against the demon king's army and recalls that Bahamut thanked her. She said she definitely felt incredible power. Kuzuka appears, says hello, and rushes to hug the hero. She is surprised that Alt managed to tame Mew Mew Buffalo and now can drink milk right after bathing. The main hero smiles in response. Godinia says she worked hard, and thanks to the goblins, the hot spring is almost ready. Alt replies that Kuza, as expected from someone responsible for the springs, really tried hard. Alt introduces Kuza and says she is responsible for the construction and operation of the hot hotel. He explains, Rudia is in charge of cultivation, Gain holds the defense, Bear collects honey, and Snowball is responsible for security. Alt praises Kuzuka. She says she likes it when the master strokes her head and wants to be stroked even more. Rudia pulls back the curtains and leads you away from the protagonist and asks how long she plans to cling to the protagonist. The goddess calls the girl selfish. She constantly wants to be the only one for Alt. Rudia, pressing against the protagonist, says she is not selfish, it's just that Alt is hers because she is his. She hurries to intervene and expresses complaints. Gain says the girl looks so energetic, and Tio laughs at the situation. The elf cannot believe that there are so many different races in this village. Beastmen, goblins, humans. Tio notes that this resembles the utopia Lucifer, the demon king of light, tried to build. Alt replies that there is something in common with this legend. He recalls how Lucifer invaded heaven to take everything under control there. In the heavens, Lucifer fell in love with the goddess Rudia. The hero thinks that the goddess has the same name as his Rudia. Alt doubts whether the goddess Rudia is the same Rudia he summoned. Rumor says that Rudia is a goddess who fell asleep 2,000 years ago. The hero wonders if what Rudia told him is true. Tio says, whatever the case, she ruled the whole house. Alt explains that the fox-eared Kuza is not a beastman, but the goddess of hot springs. The elven princess is amazed, and the hero says he has a skill and calls her god of Gachai. The protagonist says that he called both of them and that they are goddesses. He says, Rudia is the goddess of fertility. The elf is amazed and says that this person is the goddess Rudia herself, the supreme god who governs nature and whom the elves revere. Tio says he appreciates the hero's help. The villagers rejoice at Alta's return. The goblin and the bear rejoice at the protagonist's return and greet him. The peasants show the hero the tomatoes and insist that they are wonderful. Alt, holding a tomato in his hand, says, it's all thanks to Rydia, and offers Tio to taste it. He explains, when Rydia touches the tomatoes with her hand, they grow. The elf takes a tomato in his palm, bites it, and says that the taste is incredible. And even in the land of elves, there are no such juicy tomatoes. Alt says that the pasta made from them will be simply delicious. Hein replies, their traveling companion medicinal berries also owes her, Mrs. Rudia. The man says that there are springs and tasty food here, and if Tio stays here, she will not want to return to the land of elves. The elf is happy with this proposal. A crescent moon is visible in the sky. Tio holds milk in her hands and in a kimono says she took a bath in a hot spring. She tells Alt that the feeling is as if she is about to melt and that it is culture shock. The princess, sitting on the sofa, asks if springs can really be so pleasant and says that the milk after bathing is also wonderful. Alt, sitting nearby, is glad that she liked it. On the table stands a half-empty bottle of milk. Tio, holding it in her hands, says that she is surprised by many things now, and she cannot believe that she was greeted as warmly as an elf. Elf, the princess of the elves, says that her father and mother taught her. Humans are greedy creatures unlike elves, but she feels that she misunderstood who humans really are. Tio is ashamed of herself. She apologizes and thanks the hero for the help. The protagonist says that although it is hard to talk about it, she can tell what happened in the forest. Tio again expresses gratitude and thanks the goddess Rudia for her guidance. She asks if she was called. Rudia, opening the door, replies that no. Alt says that the elf's hearing is too good. The hero apologizes, but the elf asks to be called Tio and says that formalities are not needed. She claims to be the princess of a lost country. Alt looks at her suspiciously. Tio continues to explain that the Elven Kingdom, which in Silesia has a history of over 2,000 years, was destroyed by an attack of dark elves. The princess says, about half a year ago a new dungeon appeared in the forest. In response, she says that it was probably the dungeon where the goddess Rudia sealed one of the 7 great demon lords. The dark elf servant of the demon king was strengthened by the miasma leaking from the dungeon and rushed at them, bearing his fangs. The hero is surprised. One of the 7 great demon lords was sealed. Tio reveals that it was the demon king Belphegor. The protagonist recalls, Demon King Belphegor is the younger brother of Lucifer, the demon king of light. The book says that Belphegor lost his brother Lucifer because of Rudia, because he hated her, and also he was in a quarrel with the brother who betrayed the king. The book says that elves are descendants of the goddess Rudia, and the dark elf is a descendant of Belphegor. Alt wonders if these 2 races have been incompatible since ancient times. Tio says that the demon king Belphegor was defeated by Lucifer and sealed by the goddess Lydia. The hero asks if the sharp dark elves are watching Theo because of their connections going back 2,000 years. The princess replies, no, not only because of that. She says she trusts the hero. Alt, pressing his palm to his chest, solemnly promises not to tell anyone a single word. The girl smiles and says, the key to breaking the seal of the demon king Belphegor is the blood of the royal elf lineage. The hero asks about the royal blood, and Tio says that in other words it is her blood. The girl says, to resurrect the demon king, her blood must be spilled on Belphegor's sarcophagus. And when the country fell, a rule appeared: the royal family must take their own lives, and the girl must never give her blood. Blood, she continues to say that, seeing the elf smile, the dead people, the ruined statue of the goddess, and the table with 3 daggers lying on it, the girl was frightened. When a dagger pressed against her throat, she was pushed away. It turned out her parents did not let her die. They wanted Tio to survive and be happy, so they allowed her to escape. The princess, sobbing, says she wanted that too, and that she is miserable she could do nothing. Neither save nor die, just ran away and thus reached these lands. The boy looks at the elf. The girl thinks that this is exactly why she was attacked in the forest. The hero believes that Tio does not sigh coward and says he understands how hard it was for her to go through all this. Alt says that now everything is fine, and as long as the elf is in the village, neither elves nor dark elves will get to her. Trembling, the girl asks how sure the hero is about this, since her appearance in the village could bring them trouble. Tio, clutching the fabric in her hands, says she is still not sure if she should obey the royal rules. Alt stands up and shouts that this is complete nonsense carried by the elf, and asks, if the dark elves wanted to defeat the elves, wouldn't it be smarter for the other side to die? The protagonist shouts that this is his territory and asks if they can start a war without permission while he is here. Alt turns to Tio and says she has nothing to worry about. The protagonist and his allies are here. The traveler says that even Rudia herself is here, and thinks, if the supreme god of Tio and the elves is Rudia, then this village must be the perfect place for Tio. The elf says that if the elves attack, Alt assures her there is no need to worry, they will not touch her. He adds that he would rather try to convince them to stand together, hold hands, and fight together. Tio is happy. The princess bursts into the hero through tears, hugs him, thanks him, and asks if Alt is really the messenger of the goddess Rudia. The hero replies that he does not know, but first asks to be released. Rudia explodes and Alt shouts that it happened again. The girl says, something bad happened as they were attacked by elves. All houses are on fire, people try to extinguish faster. One elf stands up and shouts that the goddess Rudia has placed responsibility on them to notice the demon king. This is a holy war to fulfill the will of the goddess, and he will get the life of Princess Tia. The hero says that this is exactly why they came to this village. He turns and looks at the girl. Rudia, pointing to herself, exclaims in surprise, it's me. An arrow flies past the heroes nearby. Alt tells Rudia, it's dangerous here, you need to duck. The girl objects, it's impossible. She stands up and shouts that she is the goddess of fertility, Rudia. She keeps shouting that this is hers and that Alt's love nest, so they need to stop the attacks right now. The elves say she is lying and that she is not a goddess and even call her stupid. The enemy shoots arrows at them and orders to hand over Tio, who is theirs, for a bloody ritual. Rudia, crouching, does not know what to do. Alt uses sacred flame and it burns all the arrows flying at them. The elf shouts that this cannot be. Alt stands ready. The elf shouts to the others that they must attack with fireballs instead of arrows, and orders to burn the village of sinful people. The hero asks to wait a minute and introduces himself, Altoston, the owner of these places. He says he wants to talk. The enemy elf laughs. There will be no negotiations because the hero is a messenger of the demon lord, who even forces goblins to. Other goblins scream in pain and ask the goddess if she can be gentler, it's too hot. Kyuzugu, smiling, replies, the hotter the water, the better for their bodies. She summons water and it naturally flows from the spring. The goblins rejoice because the water gives them strength, and the protagonist orders to capture the elves without killing them. Jane says this is madness. Elves are masters of archery and magic. Holding the sword, the traveler continues to insist that if he does nothing, he might die. Descending wooden stairs, Alt thinks that Jane is right. The hero wonders if Bahamut can silence the elves acting from a deep sense of duty. Rudia calls Alt and suggests summoning the god Gacha, because the hero has already accumulated 5 sacred stones as a bonus for entry. Alt agrees. The circle begins to glow, and the hero, giving the sacred stones for entry, asks the god Gachai to open the gate to get out of the difficult situation. This shocks the enemies. A pillar of light appears. Houses are burning. Alt thinks, a god will appear who can capture the enemy and it is necessary to try. The sacred stones shine. The hero calls the god Gachai to reveal himself. A sound is heard and a pillar of light appears. The protagonist wonders if the summoned one can handle their situation. A rare giant soldier, the last weapon of the gods, appears in turn in extermination mode. The soldier says he will destroy the fools who challenge his master. The robot waits for orders from the master and asks for permission to exterminate everyone. He says he will wipe every enemy off the face of the earth. The protagonist asks to wait, and the soldier continues to explain that some of the soldier's abilities will be inherited as skills. A characteristic window opens, and a sound is heard. The skill stun arrow is acquired. The hero is shockingly impressed by the acquired skill. The plot hero asks the giant soldier to wait and orders to neutralize the enemies without killing them. The soldier replies, whoever raises a sword against their master will be a slave for life. After that, he switches the mode to opponent neutralization. The elf shouts at the robot that it will take his head and grabs a lightning bolt. The robot, turning its head towards him, activates a barrier against magic. The enemy elf shouts that he jumped back and orders everyone to be on alert. This colossus is compared to an A-rank monster, and adamant armor will not let it be destroyed. Archers release arrows. The giant soldier says, if they do not surrender in 10 seconds, he will use force. The elves respond that neither magical nor ordinary arrows affect him and ask what to do. The robot starts a countdown. Alt asks to stop and shouts that they cannot be killed. The giant says, don't worry, and explains that the non-lethal mode only causes pain worse than death, so they will not die. The machine orders them to feel deadly pain. They will fight in agony but will not die. The elf shouts that they are being toyed with and orders them to shoot, focusing magic even stronger. Magic, the timer has ended. The giant soldier suppresses the enemies with an impressive arrow. The elves shout, fight nearby, and the enemy elf asks for Princess Tio. A stunning arrow hits him and all enemy soldiers fall to the ground unconscious. The giant soldier says there are no casualties. Rudia runs forward and says that this is a convenient power as expected from the giant soldier. Alt freezes in complete confusion. Kyuzuhi activates the hot springs power. The elves lie on the ground. The hero lays his head on the elf's chest and says that their lives are not in danger. Jane asks if he intended to kill them and looking at the robot says that it is frightening. The protagonist says that somehow everything worked out and asks what to do next. As he goes down the stairs, Tio runs out and catches up with him, asking if he is okay. Alt tells the princess that it is still dangerous outside. The elf replies that she heard a loud crack and got scared. She apologizes and says that it is all because of her. It is raining. The hero says the village is already destroyed. The elf asks if there are any wounded and says she can use her healing magic. Alt says everything needs to be checked quickly. The girl runs forward and tells the hero, something terrible happened. Her father was wounded by an arrow and he is no longer breathing. The villagers gather around the body and the girl calls for her father. The heroes rush to the place but are too late. The man is already in heaven. Heaven, the girl looks at her father. The girl, covering her face with her hands, is sobbing. Tio says this cannot be. The man standing next to Alt notices her and shouts, isn't she an elf? The man continues shouting at Tio not to look at their fallen comrade with such pitiful eyes and declares that they will not forgive her. The hero asks the peasants to calm down, and the man who raised the sword asks what exactly the hero is doing. Angry peasants ask Lord Alt to get off the road, but the main hero stands before them and says that this elf is not an enemy, asking them to stop. The elf sits on a tree and aims an arrow at Alt. Snowball starts barking loudly. The elf releases an arrow, but the hero manages to dodge. The villagers notice both the enemy and the elf. Angry at the dog, the elf draws another arrow. Alt uses a giant skill, stun arrow. The elf, shouting in pain, falls from the tree. The angry peasants ask the hero to say that he is also his ally. The main hero asks everyone to calm down. The peasants look at him. The hero, pointing at Tio, says that she is on their side and came to help. And when they started talking about the wounded, it was already too late. Rudia approaches and says that nothing can be done. The girl says it's her turn. Gain and the girl are surprised. Rudia orders them to stand and watch. Tio thinks, isn't she the supreme goddess of the elves, and this looks too disrespectful. The hero says he believes in Rudiath. Girl nods happily. The peasants ask if this is really Lady Rudia. The goddess standing beside the fallen man asks the tears of the world tree to bring this man back to life. The glow breaks through the chest of the man lying on the ground. Alt says the light is warm. Tio and the girl smile happily and the villagers gather around. Waking up, the man asks if he fell asleep himself. The girl calls her father and throws herself into his arms with all her might. Rudia sighs and rejoices that everything went smoothly. The elf says in surprise that this is Rudia's power, the one the elves passed down in legends for many years, the tears of the world tree. Tio says that Rudia is real and that she is their supreme elven goddess. Rudia says that she still insists on the same thing. She is the true goddess summoned by Lord Alt. The elf lying on the ground clenches his hands and says that this is punishment for pretending to be a goddess. The giant soldier reaches out to the elf and says he hates those who darken happiness and beat the elf. He raises his hands up and joyfully announces that all targets have been successfully suppressed. The machine says that he is returning home after completing the mission. Alt holds a card with the giant soldier and thinks what a strange god he is, but still thanks him. Thanks to him they were saved. The hero also silently thanks Rudia. The tied group of soldiers asks what they will do with them. Rudia replies that first she will douse them with hot spring water and then make them swallow milk with otherworldly pleasure. The elves begin to pray to the goddess Rudia for salvation. Alt says that if they take this hot spring, the wounds and pains in their bodies will completely heal. The protagonist says that after this he will be tired and asks to eat enough. The elves exchange glances. Alt declares that he does not intend to quarrel with them. He would like to have the opportunity to talk over food. Rudia says that fresh bread dough with honey is incredibly delicious. The tied elf's stomach growls with hunger. Tio addresses her people and says that she was attacked by a dark elf and Lord Alt saved her. Before her people, Princess Tio admitted that she broke the rules to survive, and now doubts whether her words have any weight. She further assured the elves that humans will follow the gods and become allies of the elves. Besides preventing the Demon King from resurrecting with the help of Lord Alt, the Elven Kingdom could be revived. She continued. Raising her voice, she asked the elves to trust her once again. She looked around the crowd and saw faces twisted with bitterness. Someone staggered. And not daring to raise his head, he said with firm determination that they all wanted to restore the kingdom together with their princess. But when they came for her, they saw that she had hired a girl who pretended to be the supreme goddess. Hearing this, Rudia cried out in displeasure. She could not understand why no one believed her, since she truly was a real goddess. Seeing Rudia firmly grasp the face of the unbeliever, Alt tried to stop them. Not believing that the scream had indeed come from the crowd, the speaker reminded her. She wanted to immerse everyone in boiling water. Tio tirelessly assured that the girl standing before them was the very goddess of fertility. And Rudia, hearing the dissatisfaction, maliciously explained that he spoke so only because he himself had witnessed a miracle from mythology. Meanwhile, the princess continued to explain. The land on which they now stood belonged to Mr. Alt, who had summoned Rudia. The tears of the world tree were a secret belonging only to the two of them. Rudia looked at the crowd of ignoramuses with disgust. Smiling ominously, she said that these tears could heal any wound only because she was a goddess. The hot spring had the same powers, so she sent the elves there. Slightly disappointed, one of them finally admitted he had seen everything the goddess told him and swore that every word of hers was true. Rudia rejoiced. Finally, after so many years of saying this, everyone believed. She lifted a small stool and placed it in front of her. Climbing onto it, she addressed the elves and expressed her admiration. She was impressed by the dedication with which they fulfilled their duty. Yet she reminded them, even gods do not idle. According to the covenant of God Gachai, all gods restored their power through sacrifices and were again preparing to descend to earth. Hearing this, many glances looked at the goddess differently, with genuine unease. Pay for Gachu and save the world together with Alt. We will stand shoulder to shoulder against the enemies. Elves, shouted Rudia, and this inspired everyone present. In the crowd, heated by the goddess's passionate speech, many joyful exclamations were heard. They praised Lady Rudia. Shaking Mr. Alt's hand, the supreme commander of the elves apologized for the attack on his lands, because after the fall of the kingdom the elves decided all they had left was the duty they had to fulfill. And he thanked the princess for helping them avoid a catastrophic fate. She turned again to the commander-in-chief, Lady Rudia, and reminded, it was she who gave the order not to allow the resurrection of the demon king Belphegor. But she added that, besides royal blood, there is one more important thing. When he first heard this, Mr. Alt turned to the goddess in surprise, and it was none other than Belphegor's servant. She did not slow down for a moment and continued. The commander smiled impressed because the goddess knew about this, but Alt still did not understand who this servant was. Then Rudia explained to him, the servant is a vessel where the demon king is to be transferred. Belphegor is a demon lord who feeds on laziness and loves those who seek success without making any effort. But even if such a vessel already exists, royal blood is still needed to resurrect it. And if this happens, their military strength may not be enough to prevent it. After such a long conversation, Alt finally realized why the elves are watching Tio and proposed the following plan of action. As the ruler of these lands, he will give them permission to descend into the dungeon where Belphegor lives. When she goes down there, the princess will be protected by both her and his subordinates. In this case, Tio would no longer be a victim, and anyone trying to enter the sealed lands would be caught. The state commander, feeling incredible joy, thanked Alt again for help in this difficult matter. The young lord's only goal is to create a utopia where all races will live together happily. Therefore, he could not allow the demon king to be resurrected. Ah, if only he could unite with the dark elves. All thoughts flared with irritating anger. What will happen when the demon king is resurrected? And in that case, he has no choice but to fight and protect everyone. These heavy thoughts of Alt were dispelled as soon as the commander-in-chief released the next tirade. He apologized again and thanked the goddess, who was already beginning to tire of it. She was ready to forgive them all because now she was lucky to live with the person she had not gotten along with in her past life. Hearing this, Alt approached Rudia Closersch, wanted to find out what had happened between them in their past life. You still do not remember the goddess, but once you yourself were the king of demons. The young man did not expect this. His mouth opened by itself in shock and his eyes involuntarily widened. You led the goblins with such ease, and the goddess began to remember. Still not believing, Alt burst out shouting that he had always been an ordinary man. You were the strongest demon lord and all the monsters loved you and obeyed without any questions. But in the next life, almost none of that remained. He was able to summon goddesses, Rudia happily continued. Having heard everything he heard, the commander-in-chief had to admit, this was simply impossible. Most likely, it was the same man whom the goddess once loved. Feeling the support, Alt became even more convinced that this was impossible. Maybe, Rudia could not understand why the young lord each time could not remember anything about the demon king, both this time and the last. In any case, you need to know, a ringing figure is not the best. Be ready to return your abilities and memories of our love. Ending the argument at this point, the goddess laughed and pressed the young man to herself. Man, here he realized. No matter how hard he tried to break free from Rudia's strong embrace, it was unlikely he would succeed. Despite everything that happened, he felt relief. Cooperation with the elves turned out to be pleasant, so now he could not worry about Tio. She was surrounded by loyal elves. But what would they do in such a situation? Alt decided that the best thing was to start by gradually increasing the number of people who could live on his lands, and likewise gradually increasing his wealth. Then let's start with the legendary sweets of the elves, the princess suggested. She had once presented them to the supreme goddess who loved them very much. So upon hearing about them again, the princess jumped for joy and already anticipated tasting them once more. Tio was certain she would bring profit to their village and that could be invested in gacha. Alt did not fully understand what the princess meant, so he decided to ask again, but the girl said he would see everything later. At that time, the maid cautiously entered the main residence of the county to the office of Count Dorian, and seeing the miserable state of the count, could not bring herself to speak. She stood before his desk and waited. After recovering a little, he finally spoke, dragging out his words and feverishly moving piles of papers from one side of the desk to the other. After greeting Ririna, the count remembered that she had been present for everything. She immediately agreed to this but did not recognize Namekla as her master. Saying this, she tried to look confident, not lowering her gaze from the master. Meanwhile, the count slouched even more and lowered his head further, then quietly ordered Ririna to immediately go to the border where Alt was now. Rising slightly, he handed the surprised girl a sealed envelope. Empty and doomed eyes looked up at the maid but seemed to look through her. The count could not stop blaming himself. Because of him, Namekla, whose ability turned out to be useless, became the royal tamer. He could not tame the dragon and even wounded her royal highness. Once confident in every step, now a completely broken man continued in grief. Because Namekla could not control her powers, dishonorable people began stealing from them. Magical beasts living within the palace walls are boiling with discontent and could break out of control at any moment. A moment later, the count clasped his head with both hands and roared in despair. He was struck by the realization. At this pace, he would not live to old age and almost certainly their family would be executed. Tears flowed from the man's eyes as he broke into a desperate howl. He hated himself for having come so far. Now he seemed to be the only candidate suitable for the role of the next head of the family. If it were possible, the girl quietly intervened, it would have been better if all his merits had been recognized earlier. Calming down a little, the Count decided in a steady tone. For now, the monsters are still kept under control in his name, but it is better to transfer the position of head of the family to Altus. So, I think this is exactly what you wrote in the letter. Ririna confirmed her suspicion. The girl agreed with this decision. She would be on cloud nine if her master inherited the title of Count. Therefore, the current head of the family asked her to do everything possible to make Alt agree to take on this title. You are worried that he might refuse. Ririna's surprise the knew no bounds. After all, Mr. Alt really adored the monsters of the royal palace. But the Count's fears were not unfounded. Not long ago, Alt sent him a letter releasing a messenger quail to the residence. Hearing this, the maid was even more surprised. In turn, the Count was also impressed. Because in the letter, the son described the rescue of the elven princess and the conclusion of an alliance with this people. And also as proof of friendship, he held a certain magical item in his hand. If he really dared to do this, it would be a historic victory. Elven magic is much stronger than human magic, and their country desperately needed various magical technologies. But it was widely known to everyone before this. Elves hated humans. They isolated themselves from the outside world with a barrier once it blocked part of the forest and prevented anyone from stealing their technology. Realizing how incredibly Mr. Altid acted, the maid could not help but smile. She became even more convinced of what a wonderful master she had. Meanwhile, the Count sadly propped his head with his hand and clenched his teeth. He was sure his son was angry with him. And yet he did not stop thinking about the benefits of an alliance with the elves. It would give them access to their technology. But what if they monopolize it? And would it be profitable? Worried about her master by the misty murmuring, Ririna was already preparing to interrupt him, when suddenly fierce blows sounded on the door like a storm. Namakul rushed into the office, threw the door wide open and called for his father anxiously because something had happened. How can this be understood? Can a brother become the head of the family? The young man shouted at his father right in the face, his voice filled with open rage, and he slammed his palm on the table. Just now Namakul was negotiating to hire a skilled assassin as his bodyguard. He was sure, under the protection of such a man, he could tame the dragon. But the father interrupted his passionate speech. Seeing his son, Dorian admitted his mistake. The dragon tamer ability is not a skill of their unconditional subjugation. Whether you succeed in taming the dragon depends on your basic dragon trainer skills. The Count said weakly, leaning back in his chair. Once, due to the lack of this skill, he could not tame Bahamut. Angry and disappointed, Namakul realized. With a level 1 animal handler skill, the chances of taming a dragon are too small. Draco, know better like this. It's simply impossible, Dorian added after a short pause. This sharp phrase from the father struck the young man like thunder. If this continues, our family will perish, the Count continued, ignoring his son's embarrassment. Dad, leaning on his hand, looked bored and ordered Namakul to bow at Alt's feet and try to resurrect the family. Hearing this, the young man gritted his teeth in anger. Despite his low skill level, he still considered himself better than his brother. In his opinion, Alt's skill, god of gacha, was completely useless. Did he not deserve to be the head of the family? Picking up these words, he hit the table again and overturned several sheets of paper. Hero, noticing this, Ririna was already reaching to pick them up, but suddenly saw a photo of a beauty on one of them. Noticing the surprise on her face, Namakul also looked at the fallen sheet and both froze. They both glanced at the not-so-young Count and froze, waiting for an explanation. But he faltered, a little embarrassed that he was exposed earlier than he planned. A long silence broke when the young man finally understood why his father so stubbornly demanded Alt be returned. He just wanted to retire early and be in the company of lovely ladies again. Again, not denying the obvious, the Count decided to tell everything as it was. The care for monsters entrusted to him since childhood did not interest him. But despite this, as the head of the Austen family, he had fulfilled his duty for many years. So he saw nothing wrong with retiring early and doing what he liked until he grew old. But the son could not understand exactly what his father wanted and decided that he was most likely just deceiving him. Because of this, a heated quarrel broke out between them. Looking at them from the side, Ririna sighed heavily and mentally wished to be by Lord Alta's side as soon as possible. Meanwhile, two travelers were making their way through the two-sided Silesian sea of trees, and one of them noticed the entrance to this place. On the spot, a delicate girl was supporting the wounded young man and helping him stand step by step. She encouraged him, assuring that there was very little left to the village of Alta. Not noticing a huge root in the grass, the young man stumbled. The girl could not hold him and they both fell to the ground. The wounded man was the first to worry and asked if Rin was all right. Tears rolled down the girl's eyes. She could not come to terms with her brother's wounds and did not believe that he was disfigured. But the worst thing was that it was done by one person, Namakail Austin, whom Rin now hated and despised. If we were travelers, the nobles would hardly have treated us so cruelly, the young man said as calmly as possible, trying to calm Rin. But he did everything in such a way that she became even angrier. She could not agree to that. She was already about to respond to her brother when something suddenly caught his attention. Several dragons circled above them. They noticed the prey and grinned joyfully, anticipating a fun hunt. Rin decided to attack first and used the blizzard skill. Many shards of ice flew at the monsters. But as soon as the glow from the spell faded, a terrible sight appeared before the travelers. The dragons repelled Rin's attack. Despite everything that was happening, it remained unclear how these dragons ended up here at all. Although he wanted to save his sister, the young man decided it would be better if Rin left him. Then she would have a chance to escape. But why did they come here together then? Together, the girl felt completely doomed. Suddenly, another dragon appeared in the sky, much larger than the three that attacked the travelers. Its scales looked like armor, and its voice cut through the air. Violence was forbidden by the order of its master. In the garden, the girl, still not understanding what was happening, realized before them was the sacred dragon Bahamut himself. Suddenly, a rider on a white wolf jumped out of the forest. Approaching the girl, he asked if she was injured. Rin, not believing her own eyes, asked him in response if he was Lord Named. Alta was surprised. The girl knew his brother. Yet despite this, the young lord introduced himself. He was the elder brother of the lord. My lord, asked Alta Bahamut, may I destroy those who devour dragons with my breath? But Alta refused. He believed that even such dragons could be tamed. Deciding that Bahamut was distracted, the man-eating dragons surrounded him and hoped that if they all attacked together, Bahamut would fall. But everything turned out a little differently. Bahamut, not doubting his strength for a moment, grabbed several and threw them far into the forest. It seemed that after falling from such a height they should have fainted or at least weakened. But even landing on their backs, both could still move. They immediately took off upwards, and almost immediately Bahamut caught them and threw them to the ground again. Holding one of the enemies with his lower paw, Bahamut noticed that one of the pack was flying away. As expected, this did not help him at all. Flying after, Bahamut not only caught up but also overtook the poor fellow, blocking his path. The next moment the future fugitive was knocked off his feet. When Bahamut looked at his fallen enemies, he was sure. Now they would not be able to harm anyone. She kept her mouth slightly open and still not believing what had happened, the girl admitted. The fight was incredible. Yawning, Bahamut lay down next to the master, who was rummaging in his bag looking for something. Rin quickly ran to help her brother. After checking that the travelers were okay, Alt approached them. But the girl, throwing an angry look at him, clenched her teeth. Her brother was wounded by Lord Namakail, and when she found out that the young man who saved them was her older brother, part of that hatred transferred to him as well. Even more exhausted, the young man tried to stop the girl, but she no longer heard him. Not long ago, they had seen off the Lord to the dungeon of purgatory during his mission to tame the dragon. However, he was defeated, and he poured all his anger and despair onto his companions. Besides his cruelty to people throughout the journey, at the end of the mission he forced her brother to carry him on his back. Then the monster attacked them. The longer Alt listened to the girl, the wider his eyes became and the wider they opened. They were too tired, so they decided to run in different directions instead of fighting the monster. But after that, the Lord blamed them for the mission's failure. But she just wanted a little adventure with her brother, and Rin, tearfully continuing her story, said further. Recovering, the wounded one again asked his sister to stop as loudly as possible. She turned to him in surprise, not understanding what exactly she had done wrong. Failure is possible in any mission, and only he is responsible for his wounds, so don't blame that person so much for them. The young man barely stood on his feet, raised one knee and bowed to his savior, apologizing for his sister's rudeness. We came here as soon as we heard about the hot spring that heals all wounds and ailments. Sir, can you show us the way? Not daring to raise his head further, the traveler continued. Here is Bahamut, resting his muzzle on his paw, grinned and finally remembered where he had seen this boy before. It was the same traveler who once protected that foolish, in his opinion, lord. The dragon admitted that he did not know about it until they entered his cave. But they were lucky. The traveler entered the cave first. The dragon rose a little and smiled at the young man. Today he met his master. The wanderer looked at Bahamut with doubt, as he did not fully understand what he was talking about. The conversation was interrupted by Alt. He fell to his knees before the travelers. He sincerely apologized for what his brother had done and honestly admitted that he knew nothing about it at all. To atone for his guilt, he offered to heal their wounds. While the dragon watched the lizard with curiosity and tried to touch it with his claw, the young tamer untied the traveler's bandages and examined the wound. Most likely, such a mark could only have been left by the deadly poisonous venom of a jellyfish. Here, no elixir will do, but don't worry. I have a stronger and more reliable remedy. I have already prepared it for the travelers. Focusing on the invocation, the young tamer closed his eyes, and part of the space was seized by the light streaming from the tear of the world tree. Not believing his own eyes, the traveler watched as his hands healed. After a few seconds, the former traces of wounds were no longer visible. Could this really be? The adventurer continued to look at his hands with disbelief, and none of the travelers could understand how this could have happened at all. Aronst could not believe that some nobleman would spend a rare potion on him, a commoner. But the assumptions were shattered instantly. Alt explained it was not about the elixir but about his special skill that allows healing. Heal, more precisely, it is a power borrowed from the goddess. Unlike her, his ability can only be used once every 3 days. But despite this, Alt decided to calm the traveler, who had already begun to worry about the rarity of this potion. Potion? Rising from the ground, Ernst apologized for the inconvenience and introduced himself to his savior, thinking about how to repay him. Wiping away tears, Rin also named herself and continued to thank Alt for healing her brother. Trying to calm his sister, the traveler reached out and hugged her shoulders, trying to soothe her, reminding her that they now stand before the Lord. Seeing such a tender scene, the young lord could not help but smile and apologized again for his brother. Again, Arendt also smiled and expressed the highest gratitude to Lord Altu and Bahamut for their help during the attack of the small dragons. The dragon proudly turned around and pretended as if he did not care. Alt suddenly quickly inquired whether his new acquaintances were S-rank adventurers, Wolves of Dawn. Today this title is rather an ornament, so even after the wounds heal, the path to the royal capital is closed to them. However, this pleased both Bahamut and his master quite a bit. Now they needed travelers, especially those who know magic. When Alt returned to his village, the amazed travelers could not take their eyes off the strange sight. While Alta was absent, the goddess and Princess Tio properly prepared for the upcoming preparation. They gathered a bunch of ingredients in the kitchen. Noticing the new guest, they quickly changed her clothes and put an apron on her. Rin blushed from this. Without hesitation, Alt also put on an apron and, heading to the kitchen table, placed a bowl in front of it. Seeing Rin's confusion, the others began explaining to her what they were about to prepare. The finest sweets of antiquity, whose recipes the elves had carefully preserved. Served, this dessert was sweet and cold at the same time. Of course, ice cream. But even despite such a small serving, Rin still could not understand why everyone was so happy. Seeing how easily Rin mixes the ingredients in the bowl, the princess was pleasantly surprised that the traveler mastered everything so quickly. That's all. Besides, Tia was glad that the girl could create ice magic, and Rin still hadn't even thought of using her power to make Candace until now. The local things shocked her. She had never seen so many different races: goblins, elves, dragons, and humans developing the city together. The most incredible thing was that all this was built by one single man. And now, in the girl's view, Mr. Alt, after watching her cook from the side, quietly approached her. Rin, who had not noticed him before, shuddered when he came a step closer. Alt decided that the girl was fascinated by cooking because she liked it and immediately declared, from today she would be responsible for the ice cream. Rudia impatiently rejoiced, clapped her hands, sometimes jumping up and down in place. Watching her, everyone wondered, could this dish really be that delicious? Having examined everything intently, the goddess began to explain that such luxury became available to the elves only because they are a magical civilization. The icy sweets were created by combining the best techniques. 2,000 years ago she ate ice cream every day, holding her hands on her hips as if everything here was hers, the goddess boasted to the young man. But he did not share her joy. He believed that eating such things daily was more harmful than using. Probably, Alt's words about doubts were not considered very important by Rudia, so she continued to dreamily ponder. This time, for dessert they would use buffalo mumu milk and bear honey, and therefore the dessert would exceed all her expectations. And finally, the highly respected words sounded, "Everything is ready." And before the goddess appeared again, her favorite dessert, ice cream made from healing berries. Then and now, the delicacy looked extremely appetizing, so much so that even Alta wanted to taste it. According to the princess, there was no need to worry about the amount of ice cream eaten, because it contained beneficial fruit juice. Rudia, not believing her luck, dared to take a spoonful, but Alt had already tasted the dessert, and it really exceeded all his expectations. In a moment she jumped for joy. It really was that ice cream. Soft, tender texture, honey aroma melting in the mouth, and a slight tartness of berries that only enhanced the flavor. After Rudia finished the first portion of the wonderful dessert, tears involuntarily rolled down her eyes. The princess was delighted. She managed to please the goddess by treating her to her favorite dessert, so she offered her another portion. Alt smiled and was sure that they could sell this ice cream as a true delicacy for their village. Seeing the general admiration, Rin decided to try the ice cream herself. She liked it too. She noticed how Alt was smiling relaxedly. But Rudia returned to him, and at that moment, for some reason, he began to deny it. No one believed him. If he hadn't liked it, he probably wouldn't have smiled like that. Then he was called and merchants arrived with hints, bringing the supplies that had been ordered. While people were unloading the convoys, the beastman merchant met Al. He looked like a cute puppy, although he hadn't been one for a long time. The young lord could not help but apologize to Inu after all. It was because of his request that they had to drag so much from abroad. But this stop did not feel shame at all. For them, it was something like Blee. Blessing, one day a curious dragon, smelling a delicious scent coming from where Inu was heard, decided to find out who it was. His sudden appearance scared the workers so much that they didn't believe it. Lord Alt managed to tame them. At the same time, he thought that his merits were exaggerated and was sure he managed to tame these dragons only because they were low rank. This shocked those nearby the most. Alt was more interested in whether there were any problems with these products on the way. When he heard a negative answer, he rejoiced and changed the subject. He was gnawed by the thought. Did the beastman remember that bear the young man had told him about earlier? Of course, the newcomer supported the conversation with sincere interest. How could he forget that story? It was very important for him to know whether Mr. Alt had made progress in taming the bear. Bear, deciding not to lay all the cards on the table at once. The Alt conspirators smiled and, covering his mouth with their palm, offered the merchants to taste their new signature sauce dip. When they visited this village, everything was full of hints, joyful and pleasant. They always left here happy and satisfied. The owner of these lands was so kind to them. Alt asked Tio to bring treats to the guests, and deciding how they would react, watched from the side. Meanwhile, the princess, offering dessert, introduced herself and invited more and more new guests to the table. Seeing that sophistication, one of them snorted with distrusting to understand exactly what they were being offered to taste. One of them slouched in his chair, realizing that before them was a real elven princess. Smiling, Alt told the guests about the delicious dessert and asked them to try it before it melted. Sniffing, they recognized and caught the pleasant sweet smell and decided to taste the treat. Divina, what is it? They could not understand why this dessert was so delicious. One of them suggested, the secret is in the honey. Yes, they had never tasted anything like it before. This icy dessert is called ice cream, and its recipe has been known to elves since ancient times in production. The princess used her magic of absolute freezing, which allows creating ice that never melts. This time we were able to recreate the same sweetness, only thanks to the help of everyone else. We wanted to make it the highlight of our village. Alt continued to rejoice. Meanwhile, the stunned guests suddenly fell silent. Then a loud, joyful howl sounded, and you rejoiced with yourself. They were sure, if they started selling this delicacy, it would definitely bring a lot of money. This dessert is so delicious on its own that it will undoubtedly become the most popular. And its production also uses ancient elvish magic sought after in many countries. Does the princess herself really do this? Not exactly. So as not to dampen the enthusiasm of her interlocutors, Alt began, this is also done by the sorceress Rin. The lucky ones of you two stood in a circle and raised their ice cream cups, joining them together, thus the dessert got a new name, ice cream from the elven princess. Her faithful servant, hearing such rudeness both towards her and Rin, hurried to interrupt the merchant's celebration. However, he failed to achieve this. They were consumed by thoughts of how this dish would make all their dreams come true, bringing incredible profits. Now Alt himself tried to stop them and said that they were planning mass production of the dessert because it was handmade work. You don't need to worry about this. First, we will demonstrate the princess's sweets, and only then will we deal with hiring staff and setting up the ranch for Buffalo Mumo. Winking one of the Inu, he continued to drive away Alta's death. Raises doubt. The packaging for ice cream and similar products is unique, so why not make it your own brand? A merchant who hasn't noticed anything like this is not a merchant at all. He keeps babbling about Alta and yawned about you. Mr. Alt, we want to obtain exclusive rights to sell this product, his old acquaintance said confidently. As a deposit, we offer you 1 million gold, and for fulfilling the contract, we pay 300,000 gold monthly. Such a generous offer incredibly surprised Alta. He did not expect such a result. He was troubled by such a large sum, but they knew. You would not understand his anxiety, because the village had grown significantly since they were last there, and the houses had become much more beautiful than before. A place where so many different races lived together. where travelers and adventurers come for healing hot springs, will now become even more popular thanks to its signature ice cream. We see how Silesia is becoming a prosperous territory, and you can be sure, our instincts do not fail us. You Alta kept repeating this and convincing us. The young lord of these lands was about to respond when a nervous scream broke out. His name was Rudia. She was grateful to the merchants for valuing all their efforts so highly, as starting a village from scratch in the wild wilderness was incredibly difficult. Alt was about to calm her down but suddenly saw. The goddess, almost without tears, shudders in Yu and in Yu's hand and is already ready to spin the gacha again. Having signed the contract, they said good being before they had even driven a few meters away. You already felt the urge to meet again. As soon as they left, Rudia repeatedly asked Al to spin the hook, happy that he now had money again. Witnessing such a sudden change in the girl's mood, the young man tried to dissuade him. And then the goddess suddenly tried with all her might to interest him so that he would do it as soon as possible. And she began to tell that a special ritual is now taking place, which increases the level of appearance. She really wanted to repeat it again. Again, how wonderful it is to relax in a sauna after a hard working day, surrounded by natural beauty. After resting, Alt pushed the phone aside and approached an inconspicuous cabinet where a small army of milk bottles stood. Opening one, he refreshed himself. Thanks to the ice cream, his holdings reached the highest point of popularity. Travelers from all over the world arrived in the village every day. Village, because ice cream was becoming more and more popular every day, Tio and Rin had to open a small cafe. The conversation about homemade ice cream from the Elven princess had no end. Endless, many claimed that they had never tasted anything more delicious, and continued to share with others that they came here just to try. All Jane and the goblin, who aptly noticed that gossip is the best advertisement, watched the crowd at the ice cream shop from the side. The young man could not help but rejoice in the success of his campaign. It brought them not only profit but also new residents and adventures. Noticing his master, the strangely looking man rushed to the alto and reported that he had fed the wyvern. However, he added sadly, the supplies for her are rapidly running out. He did not know if what remained would be enough even until the end of the month. The warrior swordsman was very surprised. He remembered that for the raid they had bought too much food, but now it suddenly turned out that it was not enough. But Alt decided that it was because these monsters loved to eat and thought about buying food for TH. As for them, so is the buffalo with me. The man continued his report, almost ignoring it. And this moment did not surprise its owner at all. He allowed the buffalo to graze freely. Thanks to this, he no longer felt stress. After Alt reported on the completed work, he allowed the man to visit the hot spring, and the man, expressing gratitude to the master, immediately rushed away. Taking care of him, Jane decided to confirm her suspicions about the identity of the employee. Could he really have been the previous owner of Shuro? The young man nodded in response. This man understood all his mistakes and began to work well again. After discussing the plan to capture the dungeon with Arendt, they agreed. Before going there, the traveler must also survey the forests around it. This will allow them to reduce the risk that someone will be able to get to the Belfigure dungeon without knowing about it. Knowledge. After Arendt was appointed Minister of Intelligence of Silesia, he promised to meet all of Alta's expectations. Of course, Arendt was already a strong fencer, but who knows, maybe after bathing in the hot springs, he will be able to conquer the dungeon on his own. Alone, you are going to play gacha today? Heinz asked weakly, touching his head as the three of them walked to the hot springs. As soon as Alt entered, his head exploded into pieces, and blood gushed from his earsall because of incredibly loud screams. Sitting on the floor from surprise, the young man witnessed a quarrel between two goddesses. Kyudzuko was sure. Her sister simply did not fully understand how important it was to attract customers. Rudia objected and stated that the most important thing for them now was to spin the gacha. The goddess of fertility declared that further development of the village would only be possible after the advancement of gacha and the summoning of new gods. Kyuzuha believed that if the conditions for guests in the hot baths were improved, adding a massage room, a personal chef, a Japanese garden, and other things, they would be drawn there, and this would also help the development of the village. The young man tried to stop them, approached closer and realized with horror. If he did this, they would tear up the check for 100 million gold from the Nuu tribe. But despite all his pleas and requests, none of the goddesses listened. They only snatched the check tighter, trying to take it from their rivals. When the inspection was almost ruined, Alt could no longer remain calm and stopped asking the girls to stop. He shouted. But despite all his efforts, at that moment the girls scattered in different directions. Each had only half of the check in her hands. Hitting the wall, the young man jerked his head painfully, then rubbed the bruise and heard another scream. Deciding that it could not get worse, Alt picked up both halves of the bill not knowing how to fix it. He figured out. The goddesses only argued because of the possible increase in the number of people who would come to the hot springs. That is, if 300 people came every day, the hot springs would become a status object. Kyuzuho was pleased with how quickly her master understood everything. In their village, considering the elves who lived there were about 200 different creatures. To implement Kyuzuki's idea, about 100 more would be needed, Alt said aloud. The goddess, who had prepared in advance for a favorable outcome, immediately held a postcard advertising their hot springs. Proud of the work she had done, the girl pricked up her ears waiting for praise. Having carefully read the text on the postcard, Alt agreed, no girl could pass by such an advertisement. Its slogan was, "If you come here, you will become as beautiful as a goddess." Kyuzuha added to her brilliant idea that demand would increase if Rudia handed out the postcards. Looking at her, no one could doubt the truthfulness of their offer. But despite the temptation of that offer, Alt was still overwhelmed by doubts. Rudia understood them well too. How could one even call customers into the forest? The main trouble was that the forest stood too close to the dungeon, so it constantly got stuck. And recently wyverns appeared. Alt could not disagree with such arguments of the goddess of fertility. After all, even the dawn wolves caused quite a lot of trouble because of them, but then suddenly the young man had an epiphany. How to deal with all the problems together and attract many women, it was joyfully proclaimed, until now that clients would be delivered to them by wyverns. These dragons will allow people to safely fly over the dangerous forest with ease, and the Hot Springs Hotel will be even better fortified. At the same time, wyverns will be able to earn their own food. Unexpectedly for herself, Rudia suddenly concluded, if this event pays off, then it will be possible to spin even more gacha. Picking up Kyuzu's idea, Alt himself began to actively develop it, and eventually they managed to make their new service a flight wyvern transportation. Both goddesses were satisfied with this decision. It will allow them to target any client. After you add new information to the flyer, distribute leaflets in all the surrounding towns and villages. Alt returned to Kyuzuhu with a smile. She, in turn, did not stop looking at him admiringly. Rudia interrupted the moment of joy by reminding him about the god of gacha. Have you already forgotten what you did with the check? Alt asked the goddesses irritably, and they were stunned. The young man sighed and calmed them down, reminding them. First, the check must be submitted to the cashier, and after verifying its authenticity at the bank, he will most likely be able to succeed. The check was still legible, so Alt hoped the bank would accept it. The goddesses, who managed to get scared joyfully, took each other's hands as a sign of reconciliation. So let's start with lunch. Alt said this and called the wyverns. Now they were flying to them over the first line of the forest. The height rose so sharply that Rudia pressed herself into the saddle and gripped Alt tighter. For her, everything happened too quickly, and very soon she tearfully begged Alta to fly more slowly. To this, Kyuzu, who had been enjoying the flight all along, advised Rudia to stay in the village if she was so afraid of heights. It is worth remembering here. They all flew together on one dragon, and there were two more nearby who enjoyed the free flight. Light, Rudia tried to justify herself to blame Yoha. She said she wanted to be close to Alt as much as possible. But she only laughed in response, saying that a goddess who is afraid of heights looks pathetic. Probably there will be clients as timid as Rudia, the young man added, calming the goddess, and this issue also needs to be resolved. Kyuzuk, thinking it over, suggested making a hut resembling a horse-drawn cart just like this. Leaving the forest behind, they headed towards the city. Seeing its walls, the young man ordered the dragon to land near the nearest gate. Before landing, the vulture stopped in the sky and did not dare to descend to the ground. Meanwhile, the travelers noticed. The gates were already raised, and some strange commotion was going on below. Armed from head to toe, the people awaited their descent. They decided to fight to the death, just not to let the enemies into the city to protect their children and wives. Their opponents turned out to be proud and formidable thunder lions. They stunned everyone with their menacing roar, approaching the city closer and closer. Alt was very impressed when he saw the thunder lions. Barely holding back nausea, Rudia offered to help all the inhabitants, while Kyuzuha watched in fear as the lions began to attack. Without hesitation, Alt ordered the vivers from above to strike the lions with their fiery breath. His order was carried out immediately, and at that very moment the sky flared up with a multitude of volleys. Not knowing whom to fear more now, the knights angrily decided to attack the aerial targets. Calling for help from the archer sand, did not realize that the dragons had already come to their aid. Hearing this, Alt shouted with all his might. He is the ruler of Silesia, and the dragons are only his tamed familiars, whom one should not fear. To confirm his words, one of the wyverns swooped down and burst into battle with Thunder Lion, covering one of the knights. Despite everything that happened, Rudia still felt nauseous and immediately shared this with the young man. Wyvern quickly realized. Thunder Lion was much weaker than Bahamut and wanted to get rid of the enemy as soon as possible. Dran was already about to strike him. But suddenly, the lion stopped him with a sharp question and he could not understand why some person was controlling him. "Because my master is strong," said the dragon and stopped. Then he noticed how foolishly the pretender was trying his cunning and smiled smugly. At that very moment, the lion broke free from under the dragon and unleashed 1,000 lightning bolts on him, knocking the poor fellow down and depriving him of consciousness. The Thunder Lions decided that Wyvern was already completely exhausted and attacked him in a pack, taking advantage of their numbers. Kyuzuku immediately rushed to help his fallen comrade, calling for a healing pair. For a few moments she covered everything around, while the lions wondered where all this smoke was coming from, and the healed dragon rushed into battle again. Joining together, the dragons began mercilessly pouring fire on their opponents. And the knights watching this almost believed they were already in hell. Alt was nearby and standing on the ground continued to support shaking Rudia. Despite all the burns, the lions did not give up and decided to launch an attack with the whole camp. Standing in a circle, they began to accumulate energy for a discharge of incredible power. Seeing this, the knights prepared to retreat. They understood that everything had gone wrong. Seeing that the overthrow would soon strike them, Kyuzi fearfully turned to her master, but he paid her no attention. He stretched out his hand and summoned the sacred fire. The charges pierced the sky and melted in young hands. The Tundra Lions could not believe that such a blow could be absorbed by the human body. In a blind rage, the leader of Thunder Lions lunged at the man. He thought the proximity of the Demon King's dungeon had empowered him, but Alt was already preparing to strike the monster again. Yet as soon as he approached, he fell and lost consciousness. Stunned by the sudden fall of the leader, the pack retreated, not daring to start the attack again. Still not recovered from the shock, Alt approached the leader and watched as his squad retreated. It seemed to him that he had seen something similar somewhere before. Sitting in a circle, the monsters bow their heads and apologize to each other. They failed to control their powers. "You will be able to use your power properly if you agree to go to our village," the young lion tamer suggested with a smile to the young lion. "Well, submission to the strong is also a kind of pride," the new leader decided after some thought. The other lions loudly supported him. Suddenly, a system window popped up before the young man. His tamer level had risen again to 12, so now he could almost double the strength of his familiars. Miraculously saved from death, each soldier tried to get as close as possible to their savior to thank him. One of them had heard a lot about the Lord of Silesia, but could not imagine that Mr. Alt would not only tame the Thunder Lion but also heal it. Until that time, only one thing remained unclear: what had brought him to their city. But the reason was surprisingly simple. They wanted to promote all the known places of their village. As soon as they read the leaflet given to them by Alt, the knights were pleasantly surprised. There were far too many tempting offers. Noticing the interest, the young city guard casually said that the hot springs heal wounds and help to recover quickly. Such overly attentive attitude could not but shorten Kyuzuha's path. She appeared before the future guests as the goddess of the hot springs. But one unfortunate detail confused the knights. The one who introduced herself as the goddess looked like a beastman. Ignoring the doubts swirling around, the cheerful Kyuzuha continued talking about how they planned to arrange several one-day tour. At the end of her speech, she invited the entire night shift to the village. Everyone who heard Kyuzuka found her incredibly cute and agreed to cooperate with their rescuers. So all over the city, a bunch of announcements about the hot springs were posted. Their fame quickly spread, and they began to attract more and more guests to the village. Regardless of position, gender, or distance, good news about the healing hot spring and the cool desert spread far and wide. After a few days, the village of Alta turned into a real commotion. People began to flock from all directions. They wanted to see all the interesting places of this land, both the shops in the city and the trip to the hot springs. Meanwhile, Rudia quietly chuckled, noticing all this. But Alu became curious why she was in such a good mood today. The reason was simple and lay in the success of their spring. In this idea, everything seemed perfect to her: the wyverns that transported clients through the air, and the thunder lions that guarded the horse-drawn carts. But most of all, of course, the goddess was pleased with the profit. Ridio was glad that despite the torn check, the young man managed to get it in cash. She continued sorting through the gold coins, and in the eyes of Hain and Aalt, such a sight looked utterly disgusting, and they did not hide it. Glancing at them with a sly look, the goddess said she had long felt the inevitable arrival of the god SSR and asked to be left with the final scene. Not fully understanding what she was talking about, Alt again decided to activate his god gacha. Despite the large expenses, the young man was confident. This money would not only pay off in the future, had already paid off now thanks to successful ice cream sales and the growing popularity of hot baths. The combat utility of SSR gods this week will be doubled. This time the goddess's prophetic sign did not fail her, and rejoicing in such luck, she decided to pray for their future success. From the outside, her plea looked strange and unnatural, so the swordsman and the goblin, frozen in surprise, involuntarily grimaced, not believing that a sixth chance could be justified. Alt alone believed Rudia's assurances, and having full confidence in victory, poured all 100 million gold into the summons. Suddenly such a dull roar struck, and the place for summoning flashed with bright light. No one understood where it came from. Gain and the goblin tried to cover their eyes. Suddenly the shockwave pushed Gain not so far, and cracks began to crawl across the floor. Thus appeared Verena, the goddess of smithing. Before everyone she stood with an incredibly huge and terrifying hammer. Despite her inevitable appearance, she was already ready to create for her master the highest weapon, capable of killing even gods. For this, she needed sacred iron and orichalcum, and Verena immediately informed about this, wishing to start smithing as soon as possible. The newly born goddess was struck when she learned that her master had none of the above, and he in response was no less amazed than she was. Earlier he thought that sacred iron existed only in legends. Verena exclaimed in despair, "Enough!" She was thrown into emotions and she struck the ground with the hammer again. After that, Alt asked her not to do that anymore. Trying to support her friend, Rudia began to praise her best work, the flaming hammer, the rarest treasure in which all the power of fire was gathered. Raising her head, the goddess recognized in her one of her sisters, and for some reason tears appeared in her eyes. Barely passing the thought immediately breathed hope into her. Maybe they did have mithril, but unfortunately for everyone, it was all burned. Maliciously, Gain was ready to extend his sword to her. Even a weapon made from monsters is ordinary steel, he reproachfully threw, indignantly not lowering his gaze. But he failed to persuade the goddess. Angry at such an unsuccessful outcome, she was ready to agree to anything just to return to smithing as soon as possible. Unlike his sister, Rudia did not give up and decided to find out if it was possible to buy mithril. But this substance was incredibly rare, so it cost 200,000 gold, and given their situation, they could not afford such a huge amount. Despair did not come. She fell to her knees again. Her goal was to create a powerful weapon, but how to do it without the necessary materials? Now she was good for nothing. Seeing the true sorrow of the goddess, even Hein could not hold back and felt sympathy for her. Lost in thought, Alta's gaze accidentally fell on a sword standing alone by the wall. Taking it into her hands, the goddess calmed down a little. Meanwhile, the young man continued. He took this sword from his parental home but never needed to use it, so he asked her to melt it down. Looking at the sword, she smiled gently as if to an old friend. But in a moment she sharply changed her expression to serious. She would polish it so well that with one strike it could kill an ancient dragon. Alta was quite surprised. Only a suitable building for the forge remained to be found, the place where the goblin kindly agreed to take the goddess. Yes, it will really be difficult to deal with her, Jane summed up with a smile, carelessly tossing the sword over his right shoulder. The young man wondered whether he should first consult Inuinu before buying rare metals. He was sure, if he trusted Verena and gave her all the materials she needed, she could do anything. A few days later, Alta was caught again with a request. They found him in a small yard designated for wyverns and did not expect anyone so early. The young man was feeding the dragons. Turning to the voice, he looked with surprise at the gloomy elves, the princess, and her two escorts. Putting on a completely serious expression, Tio asked if they could build a sauna in their village. Confused, Alt decided to ask again, do they want to build a sauna? It turned out that after the destruction of their kingdom, they never went there again. For them, it was equivalent to death. The princess could no longer stand and sat down on the ground, almost begging for a sauna. Her subordinates immediately rushed to her. Despite everything, one of the dragons lifted Rudion. No matter how much she tried to break free, she failed. Not understanding what was happening, the young man turned around and looked questioningly at the goddess of fertility. Sauna is a steam bath where people come in swimsuits to cleanse both body and soul. It was a kind of competition for them, Rudia explained. Having mastered Wyvern, she triumphantly climbed onto his head. Then, as if that were enough, placed her hands on her hips like a true master. I do not know exactly what they are talking about, whether about bathing or endurance competitions, but it is all part of elven culture, said the goddess carelessly. I think you should try it too. One of the elves supported Rudia along with everything else. It is good for health and beauty, the second added. Well, our client base has already grown significantly, so why not add a sauna to the hot springs? Molodic supported everyone who gathered. Yes, that would be wonderful. The princess immediately came to life. After the sauna, the elves also refreshed themselves with an additional swim in the cool lake. There is nothing better than this, she added dreamily. Wait, before giving in to dreams, you first need to make sure that a sauna can even be built in Kyuzuka, the young man said anxiously. The elves were thrilled with the permission to build a sauna, rejoicing incredibly. And since they already knew what a sauna was, Alt decided to make the elves responsible for its construction. The young man stubbornly decided that Tio should become the sauna manager. As soon as he barely managed to say this, he was immediately interrupted by the frightened Kyuzuhitsu crab. After a long run, she could not breathe deeply, and only after a few minutes was able to say that the hot springs were taken over by a salamander. We cannot do business like this, Kyuzuka exclaimed in horror, and her last strength passed her panic to everyone gathered. It was a real problem for her after all, even she could not bathe in her own hot springs. Arriving at the place, they saw Jane try to enter first, but he slipped. He was immediately thrown back by the burning steam. Seeing his master, he tried to briefly explain what had happened. Striving to fulfill his duty, he tried to defeat this monster. The swordsman began to justify himself, but he was interrupted by a salamander offspring. It crawled out from under the mission's debris, hot steam was escaping from its body, and this prevented Jane from approaching the monster. The child was glad to have finally found a warm place and was not going to give it to anyone. Striving to overcome the monster, Rin decided to attack it using absolute freezing, which Princess Tio had taught her. And it turns out the monster was successfully frozen solid. Those nearby felt only a sharp temperature jump, and suddenly, the ice mountain created by Rin's magic shattered into many fragments, but did not cause even the slightest harm to the little salamander. The hot steam turned into flames that could at any moment spread to the hot springs, and this frightened Kyuzuka even more. While she tried to extinguish the flames, Rin sadly recalled her ice spell. Seeing the witch's miserable state, Tio tried to calm her, and Alt decided it was time to act. They would have to try to tame the salamander. With these thoughts, he returned to the monster. Apparently, he liked this place, that's why he resisted so desperately. Hot springs are underground waters heated by part of the Earth's crust, and for salamanders, this was truly an ideal habitat. The young trainer tried to bribe the monster with better living conditions. He promised that if it moved even a little from this place, it would have the hot breath of a dragon every day. But the lizard salamander did not believe such arguments and flared up even more, unwilling to obey the man. Alt realized with horror that the taming had failed, but then she came to the rescue. She assumed that the pair did not belong to Kyuzuha, so she explained. At first, she was only looking for the master because she had already finished working on his sword. Verena, now is not the time for its presentation. The young man called to her now. They needed to figure out how to lure the salamander out of there. Seeing the little monster, the goddess of smithing could not resist. She smiled even despite its destructive power. It was too cute. Do you want to take it as a pet later? Verena asked, hopefully pointing at this wonderful creature if everything worked out. Yes, the young man answered, hesitating. While they were discussing this, the salamander began to act. Its steam became even thicker, blocking the view of both people and gods. Alt could not tame this creature and moreover could not even speak to it. Verena decided to act alone and greedily reached for the sword. Hein decided to warn her not to get too close to the monster, otherwise it would burn her. Determination spread through her as the goddess snatched the master's sword from its sheath. Deciding that he would not object, she would borrow it for a short time. Fearlessly throwing herself into the flames. After some time, she realized that they did not burn her, and gathering all her strength, she struck as if the creature was definitely listening to its master. The goddess swung the sword. Her strike literally cut through the flames, completely dispersing them and opening a passage to the salamander. The swordsman and the trainer rejoiced. The couple had finally broken up, and the dissatisfied little monster, leaning on its hind legs, spat a huge fiery sphere at the goddess. While the swordsman was furious and flustered, Theo decided to freeze the fire projectile. In Verena, seeing the alarm on their faces, the goddess simply asked them to trust her and instantly sliced the fiery sphere. Princess Theo froze the fragments before they could reach her. Her and they fell heavily to the ground, and above the salamander rose the goddess, confidently gripping a sword in her hands. Now you are ready to listen to us, Alt, with a conciliatory smile, and the monster could no longer refuse. On the very same day, they built a sauna, and Ruddy was already sitting in it, sweating profusely. Apparently everyone who was there now felt her condition, well of course, except the satisfied elves in Verena. Now the young man finally understood what a sauna was, and although he was already pouring sweat, he did not stop smiling. The goblin's body burned, as did the swordsman's body, but he was not going to give up so early. One of the elves looked at him condescendingly and laughed, and a question crept into Hein about what he had done to be looked at that way. Unable to bear the heat, Ruddy was the first to leave the sauna. and she quickly rushed to immerse herself in the cool bath. It was built near the sauna because there was no lake nearby. How pleasant it is, Ruddy stretched out contentedly in the water. Alt, who was already on the edge, went out and poured cold water over himself. Seeing him, Kyuzuza asked to tell the goddess of fertility, before jumping into the pool she needs to sweat well. All the others also dived into the icy baths, including Princess Tio, who added ice cubes there. Standing in the pool, she continued pouring cold water on herself. After thinking a little, she decided to dive into the pool head first, and then a young man and a swordsman jumped into the water with a somersault. Only the dissatisfied Kaijuzuzaha shouted at them that jumping into the pool was forbidden. But this is elven culture. The princess smiled seductively at her, and the other elves also supported her. After the spa treatments, Verna finally calmed down. Kyuzuga asked her why she did not go with the others to the pool. It turned out that it was too cold for her there, and the goddess asked if she could just take a shower instead. After a good rest, Alt decided to visit Salamander. He was interested in whether she liked her new home. The monster liked most that the new home was designed so that heat never escaped from it, so the salamander was more than satisfied. The young man also wanted to thank the creature for helping the elves fulfill their dream. The monster liked such work. Verna interrupted the conversation and was also glad that everything worked out as it should. Hearing praise from the master, who was sure everything became possible only because of her, she shyly began to deny everything in a row. Finally, Alt asked the goddess to take care of this child to teach her to control her flame. And she, with incredible enthusiasm and joy from the new job, decided to squeeze everything possible out of the salamander for the master. The conversation was interrupted by the dissatisfied shouts of Rudia. As soon as she saw their communication, she was immediately overwhelmed by jealousy because it seemed it was too close. The fact that she is slender and beautiful does not mean that you can replace her with me. She continued speaking, and with every minute her anger at the young man only grew. That's why you can't be left alone. Alt tried to justify himself, but no matter what he said, his words never reached the ears of the angry goddess. Meanwhile, Namagul stood with the mercenaries in front of the dungeon entrance. But this was not an ordinary dungeon, the very one where the demon King Belfinger slept, awaiting resurrection. He still could not force himself to enter the dark interior of the prison cell that opened before him, as if it wanted to swallow him whole. Allowing himself to laugh, the mercenary leader nicknamed the Dark Crows tried to assure the Lord that they would definitely protect him. Except for the Grand Master, all his subordinates wore masks. You couldn't distinguish their faces. One of them approached and said anxiously that the danger level in this dungeon was too high. Before entering, it was worth visiting Alta Village to double all his skills in hot springs. The response was silencing a needle that lightning fast pierced his throat. The Grandmaster conceived this scene as a lesson for other mercenaries. We cannot make this village a base. Have you forgotten what a contract is? He asked his subordinates in a quiet, eerily calm voice. We do not need anyone to say anything that would undermine our client's trust, he concluded. Rejoicing that he had finally found someone who could appreciate his abilities, Namakal decided. Even if he dies, his older brother will take care of him, although this time he will definitely be able to tame the most powerful dragon demon. Let's climb in there quickly. The Lord, filled with a premonition of victory, urged everyone else on. As if by a magic wand, a swordsman appeared among the treetops, blocking their way. He wondered if anyone was willing to enter the dungeon with permission from Lord Alta. Namakral could not believe his own eyes. Before him stood a too familiar traveler, one that painfully cut through his memory. And when Arendt recognized the old acquaintance, her face became even more serious. It was you, Your Excellency the Count, who decided to check his suspicions. The Blade Knights and the Lord were seized with furious anger. Because of your complaint, I was expelled from the guild. You know how hard it was for me. Namek would spit out every word indignantly without stopping. You got what you deserved, replied the traveler with slight irritation. The guild rules do not allow clients to mock the performers. But first, can you forgive your baseness towards my sister? The young man felt the slight irritation growing sharper and boiled with rage. Recalling the innocent face of that simpleton, the Lord burst out laughing. Ha, give me my sister right now, then we will let you go and spare your worthless life. Namakal continued confidently. As soon as he heard this, Aaron's irritation instantly disappeared. Before him stood a man who had long sunk to the very bottom. Aaron decided to enlighten him and said he and his sister now served the Lord of Silesia. Only now did Nakamura realize that he was in his brother's domain, and that the man before him was his servant. According to the law established by Alt, if the Lord and his followers had no intention against the Count of Silesia, then they should have obeyed Aaron. Anyone who tries to enter the dungeon without the permission of the owner of these lands will be fined 50,000 gold, and then the offender will be deported. The swordsman would be grateful if uninvited guests left on their own, and he had no intention of giving his sister to this rude man. Laughing again, Namakil asked Errant if he really believed that anyone would follow the laws written by his brother. And having called the dark ravens to himself, he invited them to prove here and now that they were already confident in their victory. One of the mercenaries recognized the famous traveler, the wizard, the wielder of the magic sword. A grim smile appeared on the faces of the others. They all eagerly awaited the start of the fight. "Show him all your strength," the Lord commanded. And the mercenaries, like a pack of wild dogs, rushed together at the swordsman. But he did not falter and without unnecessary fuss began preparing for the inevitable clash. The first two approached him and tried to attack from both sides together, but they did not even manage to touch Aaron's. The third, deciding that the swordsman was distracted by the other two mercenaries, quietly sneaked up behind him. But suddenly he got tangled in the adventurer's cloak so much so that nothing was visible from under it. Noticing the unlucky attacker in time, Errant intercepted him and knocked him down with a direct blow to the stomach. Immediately another one jumped on him. The traveler also managed to dodge his blow. Having made a maneuver, the mercenary, rejoicing at the return of luck, lost vigilance and exposed himself as soon as he realized that the next blow would be his last. Despite such a strong blow, he managed to stay on his feet and, jumping back several safe steps, released many deadly sharp needles into the places where there were targets. In their eyes, everything happened as if by magic. Aaron's disappeared for a few seconds, dissolving into the air, and all the needles thrown at him got stuck in the tree. Repelling the attack, the swordsman brought the third mercenary to unconsciousness. This enraged Namakil even more. He demanded that the daimyo master do something, not just stand and watch as they suffered defeat, but remain completely calm. "Disappear," he suddenly shouted loudly, and the traveler flinched a little. Grabbing Lord, who understood nothing, by the chest, he sent him on a short flight. At full speed, he flew face first into a tree and fainted from the terrible pain. Looking at unlucky Lord, Errant snatched one of the needles from the tree recently thrown at him, and strengthening his strike, calling the wind, threw it into the back of the quickly running mercenary. As soon as he fell, Ernst looked into the very thick of the battle, so it would have been better if they had left peacefully. He could not help but think. At that moment, goblins jumped out of the forest, and a cart arrived to rescue the traveler. Smiling at his friends, he hurried to calm them down. He said that today he had to use only a little magic. Later, all 5 offenders who were still unconscious were tied up by hands and feet. Next to them sat Namakil, offended by the whole world. He was just about to curse everyone in a row, saying that if he had not been stopped then, he would have long tamed the dragon in the dungeon. Enchanted by the incredible resemblance between the offender and his master, the goblin sneaked closer and looked at the one who cut off with threatening words. Ernst advised him not to pay attention to the Lord. Their resemblance was based on kinship. "Since you did not listen to my advice earlier and resisted arrest, the fine increases to 500,000 gold. The executioner announced the verdict to the count as calmly as possible. Namakil, of course, did not have such an impressive fortune on him. Then Errant suggested the count take off all his clothes and accessories. They would be returned to him after deportation. However, the Lord could not stop. His last threat sounded like this: after he tames the dragon, he will marry the princess and become king. And then this insolent traveler and his sister will regret how they treated him." The goblin was amazed by the level of ambition in such a weak person, both physically and morally, and Errant felt ashamed. Finally deciding to put the count in his place, the swordsman told him that Lord Alt already commands 5 wyverns in a Bahamut. Isn't he, his master, the perfect candidate for the role of the princess's fiancé? He finished off the bewildered lord. Namakil could not believe what he heard. How did his brother manage not only to tame a Bahamut but also to command 5 wyverns? Is that even possible? The money he receives will go to the development of Silesia, and he will turn away from the Lord, who has already become too boring for him. The next segment continued. He will continue to do everything possible to benefit his master. While he was speaking, 2 goblins approached the count and asked him to give them his clothes without any resistance. Only now did Namakil, finally fully realizing the hopelessness of his situation, force himself to submit, and every moment he was shaking with rage. Scolding the goblins who were pulling him in the cart with continuous swearing and thus finally irritating them, the Lord suddenly turned to one of them. Remembering his status, he again brazenly began to give orders. Quickly take him where needed and untie him immediately, because he was still bound. To make his companion shut up even for a moment, the goblins decided to tell him about the wyverns standing at the forest edge and the thunder lions. These monsters could easily eat such a weak timer. "Be grateful that we are carrying you," one of the goblins couldn't stand it. Yes, if you were not the younger brother of our master, everything would be completely different, supported his friend the second one. You said that from the very beginning. The Lord himself said it with even more disgust. But it's no wonder that lower monsters help him, he continued. Tired of endless reproaches, the goblins decided to leave Lord so that stronger monsters would eat them, and returning against Namakal's will, began to retreat to the forest. The young man's attempts to justify himself were cut off mid-sentence. He had already reached the city gates, and the exit was a pure spectacle. Watching them from afar, the guard greeted the goblins. Bringing the offender to the guard, they asked him to look after him despite his surprise. He, of course, agreed. But he was interested in who exactly had been brought to their gates. This man was not very smart, so he tried to enter the Demon King's dungeon without permission and began explaining about the goblin guard without much interest. Deciding that this was his chance for salvation, Namakal shouted his official title at full strength, and he demanded that they immediately prepare for him clothes, food, and drinks appropriate to his status. He also ordered the immediate execution of all goblins for not showing him proper respect. None of those present paid much attention to his efforts. The goblin told the guard that their companion was too talkative and sometimes started shouting like that. After apologies, the intern explained to Mr. Nameklu that criminals who do not obey the laws of Silesia cannot be respected. "What do you mean?" the Lord asked, stunned. "We saw that the entrance to the dungeon is controlled to prevent the Demon King from resurrecting, and we agree with this law and intend to help the guard," he replied without any hesitation. "Moreover, Mr. Alt saved our city from the Thunder Lions. We can provide you with both food and clothing, but none of your other requests will be fulfilled." The guard said this firmly, then asked to issue the prisoner work clothes. Namakal again wanted to vent his dissatisfaction to everyone present, but he was interrupted. If he does not need the clothes now, he can return them. Putting on rags, the Lord continued to shower the guards with threats. Without unnecessary emotions, they advised him to address such matters to the royal palace. Having decided to say goodbye to the guards, the goblin extended his hand to one of them. It would be wonderful if on the way they could ride in a flying carriage. But not wanting to let the guests go so early, they were offered dinner. While the goblins rejoiced at the sudden invitation, Namakil tried to understand what they meant by the flying crew. Suddenly, 3 travelers who had just arrived at the city gates joined the conversation. After greeting everyone present, one of them suggested trying meat for lunch. His gaze accidentally fell on a man tied by hands and feet. Such an appearance seemed familiar to the traveler. Grabbing the captured lord by the shoulder, he decided to find out if their accidental old acquaintance was Count Austin. The others also approached the lord. He had already become quite frightened and did not understand what was happening. They were another group unlucky with a client. Because of Namakals, they were banned in the city capital. While he was suffering over the failed reunion, Alt woke up and saw satisfied Rudia next to him. And Rurina, who accidentally set out on a journey, ended up in captivity. The morning sun, having lit up the room, slowly reached Al's eye-string to wake him up. But he only yawned and turned over to the other side. Feeling someone's close breath, the young man opened his eyes in surprise and saw a peacefully snoring rifle nearby. Because of that watchful gaze, she had to wake Yup and he could not understand what she was doing in his bed. But the goddess was by no means ashamed of such closeness, and what was so strange about a married couple sleeping together. Alt asked her not to invade his personal space anymore, but she did not listen to his arguments and pulled out a mineral from her kimono that looked too expensive, saying it was some kind of bonus. Carefully examining the crystal, the young man recognized it as a sacred stone and lit up with joy. Then Rudia magically pulled out 9 more of the same, which meant he could now spin the gacha twice. Double spinning increases the chance of getting a goddess with SR rank. The young man addressed the goddess with hope. She nodded as if to say, the more you spin the gacha, the higher the probability of pulling a ranked goddess. Even without donations, you can play 10 times in a row and get 1 SSR god. He smiled inwardly. This lasted 10 days and now finally. And he put all the sacred stones in the desk drawer. Playing 10 times in a row, of course, would be great, but then he would have to wait 2 months, he thought sadly. Rudia snapped him out of his thoughts. She was too eager to start the spell again. She decided to fervently pray for their future success, but then decided that before starting, she still needed to have breakfast. After some time, they stood again by the summoning gates. Yes, spinning the gacha and paying nothing, that was wonderful. The young man should be grateful to her because it was only possible because she loved him. Having paid for 2 spins, Alt involuntarily got excited and decided, most likely Rudia infected him now. Suddenly a radiant roll appeared. The young man reached to take it in his hands, but it shone dazzlingly. It depicted a Titan soldier of rank R. This card raised the rank of the last god weapon. which had already reached the third, and this made the robot defender incredibly happy. The system window also reported that the Titan warrior improved and acquired the skill Monster Search. New skill, exclaimed the young man, blinking in surprise. Monster Search allowed them to detect monsters within a radius of up to 5 kilometers. The Titan map appeared twice. The goddess said thoughtfully, looking intently at the system window. She hugged Al and congratulated him on surpassing his limit. And when you get that very god you already have, she continued, all his stats jump several times, and along with that you gain new skills. You got Titan twice, so you have a new skill, concluded Rudia, pleased with her new acquisition. But suddenly she noticed, the boy did not share her joy. To be honest, he would rather have gotten a new companion alt, he admitted innocently. The upset Titan could not understand why his master was not satisfied, and the reason was simple. Even several R ranks do not compare in power to SSR ranks. Telling his friends that everything was fine, he smiled and pretended to be happy with such a gain. But you can't fool yourself. The young man decided to level up Bahamut to the maximum, but how many sacred stones would be needed? While Alt complained about the harshness of the gacha system, the robot complained that he had angered his master. Then suddenly Verena addressed him and the goddess. She asked them to come with her to the permit office, because the adventurers had problems there. The permit office was a tent from which dissatisfied voices occasionally came. A middle-aged man demanded to call the chief, already quite irritated that neither the administrator nor himself was being heeded. Hanan told him that he should be glad at least to have received a permit for reconnaissance in principle with a C rank. Approaching the mountain spring, the traveler insisted. Now he had the right to the status of Air Ink Adventurer. He showed others his mithril sword because he was sure it could defeat anyone. The fact that he had such a weapon only increased his confidence. Mithril, Verena said irritably, and Alt tried to calm this man. The Demon King's dungeon was S-rank and teamed with monsters. That is why no one could be allowed in there indiscriminately. Introducing himself as the village head, the young man asked him to surrender voluntarily and not to cause unnecessary conflicts. But the man did not heed his request and proposed a bet. If he defeated the youth, he would have to give him permission. Rising, Gain asked the observer to watch his tongue. But he was no longer interested. Gain decided it would be unfair if he gained something just for winning, so he showed off his mithril sword. After thinking it over, he agreed, reminding him. Because of losing the man's sword, he would also not be allowed into the dungeon. With faith in his strength and sword, taking a quick victory, this axe rushed at the youth who only managed to grab the sword's hilt. As soon as he drew the sword from its sheath, the man was immediately thrown back by a shockwave which, among other things, passed through a huge wall of logs. Before he could fully realize the defeat, his fingers unclenched by themselves and the mithril sword fell from his hands. It was immediately caught by Verena. Blaming his weak sword for the defeat, the man began pounding his fists on the ground. But he needed to think about how to become stronger himself, not about this, as if it were meant to be. Looking over the wall he had cut with one blow, the youth began to worry whether his sword would hold. Suddenly, the traveler mentioned something about dark elves. Interested in what he heard, he asked the man again. He explained. He intended to defeat the dark elves so they could not awaken the Demon King. Rudio was about to hint to the boy, but caught the moment himself time to use a new ability. Approaching the huge forest map, he activated Monster Search. Right there on it, red lights lit up in many places. Such skill was incredibly convenient when looking for a specific monster. Glancing at the map, Verna noticed with horror a cluster of dark elves in one place, and the most terrible thing was that it was too close to their village. Alt ordered to send people there for reconnaissance. Realizing how serious the situation had become, everyone could not take their eyes off the map. At the same time in the dungeon, chained to the wall, Rurina could not understand why such a thing had happened to her. She had set out by order of Count Austin with a mission to Silesia with a cart and horses. She just wanted to see Mr. Alt again, and as there was only a little way left to the carriage, a mage suddenly appeared before her. Before she could scream, the carriage was completely destroyed, and the maid had long been sitting in an icy prison.